Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. If you're here tonight, maybe your mind hasn't quite settled down yet. Or maybe you're just looking for something gentle to keep you company. Whether you're lying in bed, drifting towards sleep, letting this play softly in the background while cooking, or keeping your headphones on during a late shift, this space is here for you to slow down and wander backward, not into fantasy, but into the deep past, into science, into memory. Tonight we're asking a simple but profound question. Why did we humans evolve families? Unlike many other animals, humans don't just survive as individuals. We build homes, raise children together, and create bonds that last beyond survival. This channel is for soft science, grounded in anthropology, archaeology, and evolutionary theory, not wild speculation. We don't have all the answers, but we do have the fossils, the stories, and the questions. And if you happen to drift off before we reach the end, that's completely fine. I've left timestamps in the description so you can return tomorrow, because this story, from the first second to the last, is worth hearing. If this kind of quiet, long-form storytelling helps you learn, relax, or simply escape the noise of the day, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps us reach more curious sapiens like you. And if you feel like sharing, tell us where or how you're listening tonight. Are you in bed, on a night shift, or somewhere far away across the world? And as always, stay curious, stay calm. A newborn foal, its legs trembling like reeds in the wind, struggles to stand within minutes of its birth. Within hours, it can follow its mother. A young monkey clinging to its mother's fur will begin its first tentative climbs in a matter of weeks. But a human child? Consider the sheer span of time, 10 long years, before a human is even remotely capable of surviving on its own. This is a profound biological paradox. Why would evolution, a process that prizes efficiency and survival above all, choose a path of such extreme and prolonged helplessness? What possible advantage could lie in such vulnerability? The answer begins not in the realm of thought, but in the stark, physical constraints of anatomy. The human brain is a marvel of nature, nearly 3 times the size of a chimpanzee's. But this magnificent organ comes with a formidable design challenge. To accommodate such a large brain, the human skull must be correspondingly large. Yet, the female pelvis is a narrow gateway, shaped by the evolutionary imperative of walking upright. This fundamental tension between the demand for a big brain and the mechanics of bipedal locomotion forced a compromise. Human infants are born neurologically unfinished, their skulls still soft and malleable so they can navigate that perilously tight passage. Our celebrated intelligence, therefore, is purchased with an initial currency of profound helplessness. We enter the world half-baked because the oven isn't big enough for a full-sized loaf. This is not a modern condition. The fossil record whispers this same story across millennia. The bones of our ancient ancestors, the hominins, tell a tale of delayed development. The patterns of dental growth, the slow fusion of cranial sutures, all point to a childhood that was long, dependent, and universal to our kind. In the harsh landscapes of the Pleistocene, a child's survival was not a solitary project. It was a communal investment. The evidence suggests a social structure where care was provided not just by the mother, but by a network of alloparents, aunts, grandmothers, siblings. This extended period of dependence was the crucible in which our social nature was forged. The very slowness of our growth created the time and the necessity for culture to take root. In our modern world, this biological reality has been transformed into a cultural superpower. Those 10 years of vulnerability are not an empty void. They are an intensive, immersive apprenticeship. It is during this protracted childhood that the complex architecture of language is wired into the brain, that social norms are absorbed through observation and play, and that the accumulated knowledge of generations is passed down. The neural pathways that will define a physicist, an artist, or a farmer are laid down in this slow, luxurious span of time. Our weakness, it seems, is the very foundation of our strength. The cradle of our dependence rocks the world. And yet, this strategy is a breathtakingly risky gamble. For every advantage gained from a long learning period, there is a terrifying counterweight of peril. A helpless infant is a magnet for disease, a burden in times of scarcity, an easy target for predators. Evolution could have chosen a safer path, a quicker maturation, a smaller brain, a less complicated social existence. The fact that it did not suggests that the rewards must have been astronomical, outweighing the immense dangers. The gamble was not on the individual, but on the group. The individual was left vulnerable so that the collective could become resilient. So perhaps the question is not why we are born so helpless, but what this helplessness requires of us. It suggests that a human being was never meant to be a self-contained unit. Our greatest asset, our complex mind, is also our greatest liability, demanding a constant investment of care and energy far beyond what a single parent can provide. In the unforgiving theater of prehistory, survival was a group performance. Does this mean that the essence of being human is not found in independence, but in our innate and irreducible need for one another? In the primordial wilderness, a child left alone would not last a day. It cannot find food, does not know to fear the shadow in the grass, cannot decipher the urgent alarm calls of its own kind. Its fate is sealed by its own helplessness. So, who then is the true architect of its survival? The answer does not lie in the child's own frail body, but in the invisible web of others that cradles it. Biologically, we are born unfinished. Our magnificent brains, those engines of future thought and language, are energy gluttons, consuming a fifth of our body's resources even at rest. To fuel such a demanding organ, an infant is a creature of pure need, requiring constant care and nourishment. This is not a design flaw, but a profound strategy. Our survival is outsourced, a collective project from the very first breath. Life itself depends on the group, a fragile, warm bundle passed between hands where food, warmth, and protection are currencies of connection, not individual possessions. We are not born into the world, we are born into a network of care. Does this mean our famed individuality is merely an illusion, a story we tell ourselves once the scaffolding of others is firmly and invisibly in place? Archaeology offers silent, stone-hard testimony to this ancient pact. In the deep recesses of caves, we find the echoes of shared fires. The bones of ancient meals, cracked open for their marrow, are found alongside the remains of the very young and the very old, those who could not hunt for themselves. This is more than just sustenance. It is a ritual of belonging. The act of sharing food, of gathering around the flickering light and warmth of a communal fire, became the bedrock of our social contract. The fire pushed back the darkness, but the circle of people pushed back a deeper, more existential cold. Can we trace the very origins of compassion, of sacrifice, to these simple, shared meals in the gathering dark? This ancient dependency did not vanish with the advent of cities and smartphones. It merely transformed. A modern child is still raised by a village, though that village now wears many masks. It is the doctor who delivers them, the teacher who shapes their mind, the farmer who grows their food, the unseen engineers who purify their water, and the complex social agreements that form a government. Our web of interdependence has grown vast and global, a dizzying network of specialized roles. We stand, unknowingly, on the shoulders of millions. Does this intricate modern system make us more free, or does it simply disguise our fundamental need for each other on a grander, more impersonal scale? Yet, if this bonding is so essential for survival, a biological imperative, why is it not universal? In the grand tapestry of mammalian life, the strategy of the solitary mother is commonplace. For many species, the male's role ends decisively with mating. He departs, his genetic legacy secured, leaving the mother and her group to shoulder the immense burden of rearing the young. This is efficient, proven by evolution. It begs a question that cuts against the grain of our human experience. If it is not strictly necessary for the male to stay, then why do we? What strange evolutionary pressure could have possibly made it advantageous for him to not just fertilize, but to father? The uniqueness of the human story, therefore, may not be found solely in the vulnerability of the child, but in the puzzling presence of the father. What does his staying imply about the path we walked alone? In the grand theater of the animal kingdom, the final act for a male often arrives swiftly after mating. He is a biological flash, a brief genetic spark that ignites a new life before vanishing back into the shadows. His role is complete. Yet, in the human story, a different narrative frequently unfolds. The father often stays. He shares the burden, the watchful nights, the gathering of food, the slow, patient work of raising a child. This lingering presence, this choice to remain, presents a profound puzzle. Why, against so many natural precedents, did this act of staying become a feature of our species? The most immediate answers are written in our very flesh and blood. Biologists point to the theory of paternal investment. For a human male, the evolutionary calculus suggests a clear benefit in nurturing his own genetic legacy. Our young are born spectacularly vulnerable, their brains unfinished, their bodies helpless for years. This long, costly childhood demands more than one provider can often give. By staying, a father dramatically increases the odds that his specific genes, his unique contribution to the gene pool, will survive and be passed on. This isn't merely a cold calculation. It is etched into our chemistry. When a man becomes a father, his body undergoes a quiet revolution. Testosterone, the hormone of competition and transient mating, recedes. In its place flows oxytocin, the famed molecule of bonding and connection. This biological alchemy encourages gentle touch, protective vigilance, and a deep, often surprising, emotional pull. Is this love, then? Just a beautiful name we've given to a sophisticated genetic survival strategy. If biology provides the blueprint, then archaeology offers us the ghostly footprints of where we first walked that path. The silent stones and buried bones of our hunter-gatherer past whisper hints of these early families. We find sites not of solitary individuals, but of groups. The tools are varied, some for hunting large game, others for preparing hides, others for grinding seeds, suggesting a division of labor that extends beyond a single mother and her child. But the most poignant evidence comes from the graves. The skeletal remains of a child, curled in the earth, buried alongside an adult. It is a silent testament to a bond that lasted beyond a single season, a care that extended even in death. This careful interment speaks of grief, of ceremony, of a connection that was recognized and honored by the community. Was this the cradle of the family? A shared project of survival that required more than one pair of hands? This ancient partnership has evolved, but its core impulse echoes into our modern world. Today, the role of a father is being constantly redefined, stretched far beyond the ancient model of the mere provider. He is no longer just the hunter returning with meat, but also the comforter reading a bedtime story, the teacher guiding small hands, the emotional anchor. We speak of co-parenting, of shared leave, of a nurturing masculinity. Yet, could it be that beneath these modern negotiations, the old, deep-rooted driver remains the same? Is the contemporary father, in all his evolved complexity, still ultimately playing the ancient, biological role of maximizing his genetic legacy by ensuring his child's success in an impossibly complex world? But this seemingly neat narrative is frayed at the edges by the messy tapestry of human history itself. For this paternal bond is not a universal, unbroken law. Across cultures and epochs, we find stark counterexamples. There have been powerful polygamous societies where a high-status man fathers many children, his paternal presence stretched thin and distant, a biological fact rather than a nurturing reality. There are matrilineal cultures where a child's primary male caregiver and role model is not the biological father, but an uncle, a grandfather. And in our own time, countless children thrive without a paternal figure, raised by mothers, grandparents, or communities. Does this variability prove that the father's stay is not a hardwired imperative, but a fluid social invention, a choice that cultures make and unmake based on circumstance? Is the bond between father and child a biological instinct waiting to be unlocked, or a beautiful, optional story we can choose to tell? To untangle instinct from choice, perhaps we must widen our gaze beyond our own species. The human family did not emerge from a vacuum. We are but one thread in the vast web of life. So, is the enduring bond of the family, in all its forms, the unique privilege of Homo sapiens, or does its blueprint lie scattered elsewhere in the animal kingdom, waiting to show us a different truth about why we stay? Do we love? Do we pair? Do we stay to raise our young? Is it a matter of the heart, or is it a script written in the ancient code of our genes? This question lingers in the quiet moments after a kiss, in the shared weary smile over a child's crib. It suggests that our most intimate bonds, the very foundation of our lives, might not be entirely our own. Perhaps they are a whisper from a deep biological past, a program running silently in the background of our conscious minds. We feel the pull of connection as something uniquely personal, a thread of emotions spun from our individual souls. But what if that thread is also a rope, one that evolution has been weaving for millions of years to pull us toward a specific destiny? The warmth of a lover's hand, the fierce protectiveness for a child. Are these feelings ours to claim, or are we simply feeling what we were built to feel? To find an answer, we must first look to the animal kingdom, our vast and varied family. Here the rule is often brief and brutal. For most species, the act of creation is where the partnership ends. They meet, they mate, and they part, leaving the immense task of raising the next generation to one parent or to chance itself. This is the efficient way, the path of least resistance. Yet, there are striking exceptions. In the frozen, windswept deserts of Antarctica, emperor penguins enact a ritual of profound cooperation. The female lays a single precious egg and immediately journeys for weeks across the ice to feed, her body depleted. She transfers the egg to the male, who balances it on his feet, covering it with a warm fold of skin. There he stands, through the darkest, coldest storms on Earth, starving, enduring, for 2 months. This is not a fleeting encounter. It is a pact, a shared investment in a fragile future. Similarly, a pair of gray wolves hunt together, raise their pups together, and form the core of a pack that thrives on loyalty and coordinated effort. These creatures are not following emotion. They are executing a deep, biological imperative. They are programmed to bond. Humans, it turns out, belong to this rare club. Our story is one of profound vulnerability. Our children are born impossibly premature, their brains so large that to be born any later would make passage through the birth canal impossible. This biological trade-off, a big brain for a long period of helplessness, created a monumental problem. A single parent, especially a mother foraging and fending for herself, could never manage alone. The infant would be doomed. Thus, evolution favored those who stuck around, those proto-humans who felt a pull to stay, to provide, to protect. They were the ones whose genes survived. Oxytocin, the molecule of bonding, floods the systems of new parents, forging a connection as powerful as any addiction. Dopamine rewards acts of care with feelings of pleasure. We were not just left to our own devices. We were chemically encouraged, wired for commitment. The family, in its most primal form, emerges from this biological cradle. It was not a social invention, but a survival strategy, written into our very blood and bone. Yet, if we dig deeper, into the layers of dust and time, we find that this strategy quickly became something more. The archaeological record of our hunter-gatherer ancestors reveals a scene not of isolated pairs, but of a community. The raising of a child was a collective endeavor. While a mother nursed, others might bring food. Elders shared wisdom. Older siblings watched over toddlers. The family unit was the first workshop of collaboration, the place where we learned to share not just resources, but time, attention, and knowledge. This was the seed of everything that followed: culture, language, society. The bond between two parents was the nucleus, but it was surrounded by a cloud of extended kin, all invested in the future, embodied by the young. The family became more than instinct. It was the original contract, the first agreement that we are in this together. It was the crucible where simple biological need was slowly, over millennia, alloyed with the first sparks of culture and mutual obligation. This brings us to our modern world, a dizzying kaleidoscope of choices. Today, the urge to pair is still fueled by those ancient biological currents: the flush of attraction, the quiet comfort of attachment, the hormonal tides that guide us. But we have built immense and complex structures upon that primal foundation. We have marriage, a legal and religious institution. We have societal norms that celebrate romantic love as the ultimate goal. We have laws that govern inheritance and rights. The decision to stay is no longer just a biological impulse. It is a choice filtered through a lens of culture, economics, and personal philosophy. We can choose to override the program. We can choose to be single parents, to live in communes, to define family in ways that transcend biology. The modern love story is a tango between the deep, rhythmic drumbeat of our DNA and the conscious, melodic choices of our individual wills. We are living in both worlds at once, forever balancing the instinct we inherited with the identity we strive to create. But this narrative, this journey from pure instinct to conscious choice, immediately presents a paradox. If long-term pairing is such a brilliant, evolved survival strategy, why would it be unique to us? The devoted penguin, the protective baboon mother, they challenge the notion that family is humanity's special invention. They force us to ask, is the family truly our exclusive domain, or merely our particular variation on a theme that nature has composed many times? The love of a mother for her child seems to be a universal force in the animal kingdom, a fierce and selfless current that flows through countless species. What then makes our version different? Is it merely a matter of degree, of complexity, or is fundamental shift that occurred in us, a new ingredient added to the recipe that transformed basic care into something else entirely? This question pulls our gaze outward, toward the other creatures with whom we share this planet. We see the penguin couple, trading shifts in the biting cold, a perfect synchronized dance of duty. We see the baboon mother, risking her life to snatch her infant back from a predator, her fear and courage etched on her face. Their bonds are real, their sacrifice is undeniable. They feel love in their own way. Yet, no other species builds a web of kinship that spans generations, that accumulates stories and traditions, that creates rules and expectations around relationships. No other species has in-laws and godparents and complicated holiday gatherings. The human family is a persistent and elaborate architecture, a castle built over generations, while the families of other species are more like sturdy, seasonal tents. So we are left with a comparison that is both humbling and puzzling. We are not alone in loving, but we seem to be alone in building a civilization upon that love. What is the source of that difference? Is it the sheer power of our brains, allowing us to imagine a future far beyond the next season? Or is it something else, something more profound, lurking in the spaces between our words and our shared memories? Perhaps the true question is not whether we are programmed to bond, but what we have chosen to build with that programming. And in that space between the instinct and the choice, do we finally find what it means to be human? In the crushing silence of the Antarctic winter, an emperor penguin father stands. He is a solitary statue against a howling white void, a single heartbeat shielding a precious egg from the lethal cold. For weeks he will fast, he will shiver, his body a cradle of dwindling warmth, all for a chick he has not yet met. Meanwhile, miles away in the sun-scorched dust of the African savanna, chaos erupts. A baboon mother, a flash of fur and fury, charges a predator many times her size. It is not a calculated act, but a visceral eruption, a defiance of the very laws of nature that says the weak must fall. Her infant's cry is a command that rewrites instinct, turning prey into protector. These scenes, separated by continents and climates, feel hauntingly familiar. They echo with a resonance that transcends species. They speak of sacrifice, of protection, of a bond that dictates one life for the sake of another. We look at this penguin's vigil, this baboon's bravery, and we see a reflection of our own deepest commitments. We are tempted to lean in and whisper across the evolutionary divide. Family? Is that what you call it too? Beneath the surface of these dramatic narratives lies a quiet biological machinery, humming a universal tune. This profound drive to nurture, to protect the next generation, is not a human invention, but an evolutionary heirloom, shared and shaped by millions of years of life's experiment. The chemistry is disarmingly familiar. In the human brain, the flood of oxytocin during a mother's first embrace, or the steady drip of dopamine during a father's playful interaction with his child, forge bonds that feel uniquely ours. They are the biochemical signature of love, of attachment, of care. Yet place a biologist's sensor near that devoted penguin father or that courageous baboon mother, and the same signals would likely flicker across the screen. Oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, facilitates the pair bonding in prairie voles and the milk letdown in nursing cats. Dopamine reinforces the rewarding act of returning to a hungry offspring. This is not to reduce the sublime to the chemical, but to suggest that the palette for painting the masterpiece of attachment was provided by evolution long before we ever picked up a brush. The imperative is simple and brutal. A species that does not care for its young is a species swiftly edited from the book of life. The mechanism is a common biological language spoken by creatures with fur, feathers, and flesh. So, is our concept of family merely a complex articulation of this ancient, universal grammar of care? The plot, however, thickens in the dust of ancient archaeological sites. Here, the human story begins to diverge from the animal narrative in subtle but profound ways. We find evidence not just of care, but of collaboration that extends far beyond the immediate nuclear unit. The bones of Homo erectus around a million-year-old fire pit tell a story not just of eating, but of sharing. Large game, hunted through coordinated, dangerous effort, is brought back and divided among the young, the old, the nursing, and the hunters. This is a calculated investment in the group's future, a web of obligation and reciprocity. The family in this emerging light becomes less a closed nursery and more an open workshop. It is the first school where the art of tool-making is passed from experienced hand to curious eyes. It is the first courtroom where social norms are negotiated and enforced around the flickering light of a fire. It is the first library of stories where the day's hunt is relived and the constellations are named, weaving a shared identity that connects the past to the future. This firelit circle expanded the definition of kin beyond biology, creating a tribe bound by shared myth, mutual dependence, and collective memory. The bond was no longer just about ensuring an infant's survival, but about building a repository of culture that would outlive any single individual. This intricate tapestry weaves itself into the modern world. Today, the human family remains that primary vessel for cultural transmission, but its form has splintered into 1,000 beautiful variations. It is a single father reading a bedtime story, a community of chosen aunts and uncles, grandparents instilling traditions, a same-sex couple fostering a child's talents. It is a structure that can be fractured, chosen, rebuilt, and redefined. It teaches language, ethics, prejudice, and compassion. It is the factory where our deepest selves are forged, for better and for worse. This complex, often messy institution of shared values and taught behaviors seems to operate on a different plane than the penguin's solitary vigil or the baboon's fierce defense. It suggests a quantum leap from biological cooperation to cultural creation. This very success forces an uncomfortable, humbling question back upon us. If the seed of family is planted in the deep soil of biology, evident in the devotion of a bird and the courage of a primate, then in what way are we truly unique? Is our elaborate construction of kinship, culture, and legacy merely a spectacularly complex variation on a theme written by natural selection? A baboon troop has its hierarchies and alliances. Elephants mourn their dead. Whales sing songs that change from one pod to the next. Are we just another species playing with the same building blocks, simply building taller, more elaborate, and perhaps more precarious towers? Have we merely dressed a universal biological imperative in the elaborate clothes of ritual and meaning, convincing ourselves of our singularity, while the primal heart beats the same rhythm within? Perhaps the answer does not lie in denying our animal origins, but in seeking the precise moment where our path began to fork. To find it, we must journey back beyond the written word, beyond the first villages, to the very cradle of our becoming. We must return to the primordial hearth, to the caves where the shadows of our ancestors first danced on walls, not just as families, but as something more. The evidence is there, buried in ancient ash and time. In the cool, silent darkness of a cave that hasn't heard a human voice in 15,000 years, you can still feel their presence. The air is thick with ghosts. If you look down, you might see the faint, circular stain of a fire pit, a dark echo of warmth against the stone floor. Scattered around it are the fragments of a shared meal, the cracked long bone of an auroch, split for its marrow, the discarded teeth of a deer. Look up. On the walls, illuminated by your own modern light, animals leap and run in a perpetual hunt, painted by hands that knew their weight and speed and spirit. This was not just a shelter, it was a sanctuary, a place of safety, of storytelling, of planning the next day's hunt. Here, in this collective space, the simple biological unit of parent and child expanded. It became a band, a community. The young were watched by many eyes, fed by many hands. The stories told around that fire wove individual experiences into a collective memory, a shared identity that said, "We are the people who hunt the bison. We are the people who tell this story." The archaeological record shows us the bones of the elderly, cared for long after they could contribute to the hunt. It shows us healed fractures, evidence that someone was fed and protected while they recovered from a crippling injury. This is a bond that transcends the immediate utilitarian logic of survival of the fittest. It hints at a covenant of care, a promise that the group will hold you even when you are weak. So, were these the first families? The answer feels both yes and no. It was a family chosen as much as born, a network of obligation and affection stretched over a wider frame. The circle of firelight pushed back the darkness, but it also drew a line. Inside was us. Outside was the unknown, the other. The very bonds that nurtured the group could also seed the concept of the stranger, the enemy. The family, in its beautiful, expansive infancy, already contained this dual potential, to protect and to exclude, to nurture and to fear. The warmth of the hearth cast long shadows. Is that the enduring human paradox, that our greatest strength, the ability to care for each other so deeply, is also the source of our deepest divides? The scent of cold ash, the brittle remains of ancient meals, and the faint ochre shadow of a handprint on a cave wall, these are the echoes of a moment. They tell a story not of a lone individual, but of a circle, of figures gathered around a primal, flickering light, their faces dancing in the orange glow against an immense and terrifying darkness. This circle, this first ring of warmth and safety, begs a question that has resonated through the millennia. Is this the first family? Not as a biological unit, but as a social idea. Born not in the quiet of a shelter, but in the wild, unpredictable theater of the open night, around a creature's mastery of flame. The biological imperative of that circle is profound, a quiet revolution in the story of a species. Before the fire, food was raw, tough, demanding immense energy to digest within a gut that was, evolutionarily speaking, a costly furnace. The discovery of cooking was an act of alchemy. It unlocked calories, softening the tough fibers of meat and tubers, pre-digesting them outside the body. This newfound energy efficiency did more than just fill bellies. It altered the very architecture of the body. Energy once dedicated to the laborious processing of food in a massive digestive tract could be diverted, redirected to fuel something else, a brain. This organ, hungry and demanding, began to expand, growing in complexity and capacity within the protective cradle of the skull. The fire, then, was a kind of metabolic key, a catalyst for the cognitive leap that would define humanity. But its gift was twofold. It offered more than just physical nourishment. It carved out a pocket of safety in a world ruled by tooth and claw. The circle of firelight became a barrier, a psychological moat against the predators that lurked in the whispering dark beyond. Within this ring of light, fear could momentarily subside. Jaw muscles could relax from their constant vigilant clench. Here, in this warm, illuminated space, was the opportunity not just to eat, but to be idle, to sit, to stare into the flames, and to talk. The shared meal, softened by fire, became the first supper, the original table around which social bonds were forged not through necessity alone, but through the luxury of time spent together, digesting not just food, but the day's events, the patterns of the stars, the first stumbling attempts at a story. Was this the moment the human mind, freed from the constant scramble for survival, began to turn inward and outward, to wonder and to connect? The archaeology of this moment is written in the faintest of charcoal scripts. At sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, the evidence is startlingly ancient. Microscopic traces of ash and burned bone nestled in layers of sediment 1,000,000 years old. This isn't the aftermath of a random wildfire, it is the deliberate, contained signature of a hearth. At Zhoukoudian in China, home to Homo erectus, the evidence is more visceral. Layers of ash, meters thick, mixed with stone tools and the bones of long-extinct animals. These are not mere campsites. They are the first living rooms, the first kitchens, the first sanctuaries. The artifacts tell a story of routine, of return. The circle of stones that defines a hearth is humanity's first permanent architecture, a gravity well that pulled people back night after night. Around these fires, tools were knapped, food was shared, and the social wheel was invented. The very act of facing one another in a circle, the fire a central heart, created a new dynamic of engagement. It fostered eye contact, the reading of expressions, the subtle mimicry that builds empathy and understanding. The vanguard of society was not a council hall or a temple, but this simple ring of warmth on a cold night. The circle, by its very geometry, suggested equality, a shared experience. But was that equality real, or was it the first stage upon which the dramas of power and hierarchy would soon be performed? This ancient impulse finds its direct descendant in the rituals of our modern world. The family dinner table, the campfire ring at a summer camp, the cozy glow of a screen that draws a family together in the evening. These are our symbolic fires. They serve the same primal purpose, to draw a circle against the chaos of the outside world. The after-work meal, where the day's triumphs and frustrations are shared over steaming plates, is a ceremony of reconnection. The television, for all its modern artifice, often acts as a central flame, a shared focus of attention that provides a common ground for conversation, a story around which to gather. We still seek that circle, that shared point of light and warmth that allows us to let our guard down, to be vulnerable, to reinforce the bonds that define our tribes, whether they are families of blood or of choice. In the flickering light of a smartphone, are we not still huddling for warmth, for connection, seeking that same primal comfort in a vast and often impersonal digital night? Have we simply traded the crackle of wood for the glow of pixels, yet still yearning for the same fundamental human connection? But the romantic image of the harmonious primal family, united in peaceful warmth, is likely a projection of our own longing. The firelight, while pushing back the external darkness, would have cast long, dancing shadows on the internal dynamics of the group. It would have illuminated not just faces, but roles. Who controlled the fire? Who had the knowledge to create it, to sustain it? Who distributed the food that was cooked upon it? This control over warmth and nourishment is a profound form of power, the earliest form of capital. It is not difficult to imagine hierarchies forming around the hearth. The strongest might claim the choicest cut of meat, the warmest spot. Gender roles, far from being a later social invention, may have found their first expression here. Was the hearth the domain of women, processing the food gathered and hunted while men dominated the storytelling? Or was the reality far more fluid, more complex? The fire provided safety, but it also provided a stage for social negotiation, for dominance, for the subtle and not so subtle plays for status that are inherent in any group of primates. Did the very thing that fostered connection also become the first altar to power, where social inequalities were first baked into the daily ritual of life? This cracks open a door to a deeper, more unsettling question. If the circle around the fire was the cradle of family, of society, and of power, then who truly stood at its center? Who was the keeper of the flame? The evidence of shared meals and social bonding is clear, but it tells only part of the story. The narrative of the primal family has long been dominated by a simple, powerful image: the man as hunter, the provider, the protector, the natural leader returning with meat to the hearth tended by the woman. This story has been told so often it feels like truth. But what if the archaeology of our deepest past tells a different story? What if the roles we assumed were carved in stone were, in fact, far more fluid, more surprising? What if the trinity of provider, protector, and leader was not a predetermined script but a roles to be contested, shared, or overturned? The circle of light holds its secret close. The shadows on the cave wall are still. They await a new telling. The bones, the tools, the ashes, they whisper a hint of a different truth, one that challenges the very foundation of the story we have told ourselves about who we were, and thus who we are. The question hangs in the air as palpable as wood smoke. Around that first fire, who really was holding the club? The familiar image is etched into our collective memory. Men, armed and purposeful, venturing into the wilderness to hunt, while women gather plants and tend to the hearth. This division feels ancient, almost instinctual, a story we have told ourselves about the origins of family and society. But the earth, that patient keeper of secrets, whispers a different tale. From the silent darkness of ancient graves, a new narrative emerges. Archaeologists carefully brush the dust from bones that have lain undisturbed for millennia, and beside them, they do not find simple beads or grinding stones. They find spear points, finely crafted and lethal. They find atlatls, the ancient force multipliers of the hunt. And these tools are cradled in the arms of women. The question then rises, quiet but insistent, challenging the very foundation of our assumptions. Who truly led the ancient family? This story begins not with strength, but with synergy. The evolutionary triumph of our species, Homo sapiens, did not rest solely on the might of any individual arm. It was forged in the fragile, powerful web of collaboration. Hunting, in the precarious world of our ancestors, was a complex calculus of strategy and shared risk. It demanded more than brute force. It required a sophisticated understanding of animal behavior, the coordination of movement, the silent language of gestures and glances, and the trust that each member would play their part. One might track, another drive the prey toward an ambush, while others waited with weapons poised. This was a symphony of cooperation, where the success of the individual was inextricably linked to the success of the whole. The spoils of the hunt were not a prize for the one who struck the final blow, but a communal resource, shared to nourish the entire group, the young, the old, those who guarded the camp, and those who ventured out. This act of sharing food, especially calorie-rich meat, may have been the glue that bonded early human societies, fostering reciprocity and strengthening social ties that went far beyond the immediate family unit. But if the key to this system was not individual prowess, but organized collective action, then what does it matter whose hand held the spear? The real instrument of survival was the group itself. The theory of collaborative hunting finds its profound proof in the quiet testimony of the dead. In the high Andes of Peru, a grave dating back 9,000 years tells a story that words alone could not. Here, researchers uncovered the skeleton of a young adult, surrounded by a hunter's toolkit of remarkable breadth and quality. There were stone projectile points for bringing down large game, a knife and flakes for butchering the carcass, and tools for scraping and tanning hides. This was not a casual participant, but a dedicated, proficient hunter, equipped for every stage of the process. The initial assumption, guided by that old familiar story, was that this must be a man. Yet, the analysis of the proteins in the teeth and bones revealed a different truth. The hunter was a woman. This discovery was not a solitary anomaly. Subsequent reanalysis of other burials across the Americas revealed that between 30 and 50% of hunters in these populations may have been women. This evidence shatters the monolithic myth of man the hunter. It paints a picture of a far more fluid and pragmatic past, where the division of labor was likely based on ability, circumstance, and group need, rather than rigid gender dictates. A woman could be the primary provider of meat. A man could be the primary gatherer of plants, or the nurturer of children. The family unit, then, was not a hierarchy of fixed roles, but a dynamic, interdependent partnership. The goal was collective survival, and every capable hand was utilized toward that end. The family was a hunting party, and the hunting party was a family. This ancient fluidity stands in stark contrast to the weight of a modern label, the breadwinner. This term, loaded with expectation and identity, is often seen as a biological imperative, a natural extension of that primordial image of the male hunter. Our social structures, our corporate policies, and even our internalized sense of duty are still shadowed by this powerful and perhaps incorrect origin story. The archaeological evidence does more than just rewrite history. It offers a liberating counter-narrative for the present. It suggests that our deepest social traditions are not carved in stone, but are instead malleable patterns in the sand, shaped by the immediate needs of survival. If the most fundamental human unit, the family, could thrive on a foundation of role flexibility 9,000 years ago, what does that say about the rigid structures we sometimes cling to today? The past becomes a mirror, reflecting not a predetermined path, but a spectrum of possibilities for how we organize our lives and share our burdens. Yet, this very notion of practicality and flexible roles leads us to a deeper, more haunting question. If the binding force of the early family was primarily functional, a simple, efficient division of labor for the procurement of food and resources, what explains the depth of the bonds that clearly formed? Cooperation for survival is one thing. We see it in wolf packs and beehives. But is that enough to explain us? The tools found in those graves were not merely discarded like broken bones. They were placed with care, chosen companions for the final journey. This act suggests a reverence that transcends utility. It hints at love, at grief, at a connection that saw the individual not just as a hunter who provided meat, but as a person who was cherished. If the clan was held together by the practicalities of the hunt, what was it that held the hunt together? Was it only the shared stomach, or was it the shared heart? To find the answer, we must look for traces of something far more elusive than stone. Tools. We must search for the fingerprints of emotion. We must turn from the single, weapon-filled grave of a hunter to the profound and heartbreaking silence of the collective tomb. What can we learn from those who were laid to rest, not alone with their tools, but together in their final sleep? Beneath the soft green fields of Europe, the earth holds a secret. It is not a secret of gold or lost treasure, but something far more intimate, Archaeologists carefully brush away the soil to reveal a scene that feels both ancient and immediate. A grave where adults and children lie side by side, their bones arranged as if they are merely sleeping. One's arm curled around another in a final silent embrace. The arrangement is so tender, so deliberate, that the millennia separating us from them seem to collapse. Were they a family? The question hangs in the air, a whisper from the deep past that tugs at a universal chord within us. This silent Stone Age tableau offers no written records, no grand monuments. Its entire story is told through posture, through proximity, through the heartbreaking geography of togetherness in death. This instinct to cluster, to protect our own, even in the face of the inevitable, may be written into our very biology. We are, at our core, vessels of genetic information on a relentless journey through time. The profound ache of grief, the unbearable void left by a loved one's passing, might be more than just emotion. It could be an evolutionary echo. The theory of kin selection suggests that our drive to protect, to mourn, and to remember is a sophisticated strategy for genetic survival. When a relative dies, a unique strand of our own shared biological code is lost from the world. The tears we shed, the rituals we perform, are not just cultural expressions. They are the outward manifestation of a deep, primal calculation, the imperative to safeguard our genetic legacy. The child is not just a child, it is a future, a branch of a family tree that will now never grow. The parent is not just a parent, they are the guardian of that future, the protector of the nest. Their loss is a biological event, a rupture in the network of shared DNA. So, we gather them close, even in death, as if our very bodies, huddled together in the cold ground, can somehow preserve what the living world has taken. This biological impulse finds its voice in the silent poetry of archaeology. At sites like Sungir in Russia, far to the east of those European fields, we find a more elaborate expression of this ancient care. Here, from the frozen grip of the permafrost, emerge the remains of individuals who were laid to rest with astonishing ceremony. A man, bent by age and a life of hardship, is buried wearing thousands of meticulously crafted ivory beads, a garment that would have required years of skilled labor to produce. Nearby, two children, a boy and a girl, are placed head to head. They are adorned with even more breathtaking finery: ivory spears carved from mammoth tusks, delicate bracelets and figurines. The investment of time and resources is staggering. This was not a society with surplus. Calories were hard-won, and survival was a daily struggle. Yet they chose to sink immense wealth, the wealth of time and energy, into the earth. Why? It speaks of a value that transcends utility. These objects were not tools for hunting or scraping hides. They were tokens. Tokens of love, of respect, of a belief that the person, their essence, required honoring beyond their last breath. It suggests the dawning of a revolutionary idea, that the bonds of family might be strong enough to stretch across the ultimate threshold, that a community could be defined not just by who shares your fire today, but by who you remember and who you journey with into the unknown. In the flickering light of their world, they may have been crafting the very first concept of an afterlife, not as a solitary voyage, but as a family reunion. This thread of memory and belonging, spun from raw biological instinct and woven into cultural practice, stretches unbroken into our modern world. We may no longer lay ivory spears in graves, but we still mark our losses with profound ritual. The family altar, with its smiling photographs and offerings of fruit and incense, the well-tended grave plot visited on quiet Sundays, the annual anniversary of a death marked by a gathering of relatives and the sharing of stories. These are all our Sungir. They are the technologies we use to build a bridge over the abyss of time. They are how a family maintains its identity, how it tells itself its own story, connecting the present to the past and future in a continuous chain. We say a name aloud on a specific day so it will not be erased by the wind. We stand together at a headstone to affirm that the circle, though broken, still holds its shape. In these acts of remembrance, we are not so different from those ancient mourners by the grave. We are still asserting that love and kinship are forces powerful enough to negotiate with oblivion. Yet, the soil is an honest keeper of records, and it does not only yield evidence of tenderness. For every grave that speaks of a quiet sleep, there is another that tells a more chilling story. The same earth that cradles those peaceful, intertwined skeletons also yields bones that bear the brutal grammar of violence. A skull fractured by a blunt force blow, a ribcage scored with the unmistakable cut marks of stone tools, marks that speak not of careful defleshing for burial, but of butchery. Some bones even show the telltale signs of having been cooked over a fire, their chemistry altered by heat. And most haunting of all, in some grim assemblages, human teeth have left their precise impressions on human bone. The evidence is stark and undeniable. It whispers of moments when the family, the clan, the tribe, the very unit meant to be a sanctuary, became the source of ultimate peril. The hearth, the symbol of warmth and community, could become the site of a horrific feast. The hand that was meant to comfort could become the one that wields the club. This is the paradox buried in our past, the shadow that falls across the tender embrace. The same impulse that drives us to protect our kin with ferocious loyalty can, under some unimaginable pressure of starvation, fear, or rage, turn inward. The circle that defines us can violently contract, excluding even those who were once within its bounds. Was this too a part of our evolution? A dark thread woven into the fabric of our social being? If love and grief are written in our genes, could violence and betrayal be scribbled in the margins? The collective grave thus becomes an ambiguous text. It can be a testament to enduring love, a family's final act of togetherness. Or it can be a crime scene, the silent witness to a primordial treachery. The bones do not say which. They simply present us with the two faces of our inheritance. So, we are left standing at the edge of this excavated pit, looking down at the silent forms. We came seeking the origin of family, and found instead a double helix of devotion and danger, woven together from the very beginning. We found the cradle, but lying beside it, never far from reach, was the club. The evidence lies before us, a riddle written in calcium and soil. If the family is our first and greatest sanctuary, the source of our deepest comfort, then what do we make of the teeth marks on the bone? The earth holds its secrets in layers of dust and stone. In some of these ancient resting places we find bones, not just the clean, white architecture of a skeleton laid to rest, but something more unsettling. Some human bones bear marks, the fine, precise lines of a cut, the jagged fracture of a percussive blow, and sometimes the unmistakable, crushing arc of teeth. The evidence is stark and undeniable. Our ancestors sometimes ate the flesh of their own kind. This discovery forces a question that echoes through the millennia, right into the heart of our most cherished ideal. If the family is our cradle, our first and most fundamental sanctuary, what does it mean to find the mark of the club upon its earliest bones? What does it mean when the tooth marks on a femur are human? From a purely biological standpoint, the act is not an anomaly. Life is a relentless competition for resources, for space, for the fleeting chance to project one's genes into the future. In the brutal calculus of survival, violence is a tool, and cannibalism can be a grim strategy with multiple purposes. It can be a desperate response to starvation, where the body of the fallen becomes mere calories, a nutrient source no different from any other game. But it can also be something colder, more calculated. It can be a form of extreme competition, a way to eliminate a rival's genetic line while simultaneously nourishing your own. It is the ultimate territorial dispute, where the territory is existence itself. Within a group, this dynamic twists into a darker shape. The tension between cooperation and competition is a constant hum in the background of social species. An individual who consumes too many resources, who challenges the dominant hierarchy too aggressively, or who simply represents a genetic dead end, can become a threat to the collective's survival. In such a pressurized system, does the act of consumption become a perverse form of cleansing, a way to recycle a problem back into a solution? The body becomes fuel, and the rival ceases to be. The line between family and food, it seems, can be terrifyingly thin when the shadow of hunger or threat grows long. If our very biology contains this blueprint for turning inward on ourselves, how deep does that programming truly run? The silent testimony of the earth offers no motive, only evidence. In the deep caves of Atapuerca, Spain, the bones of Homo antecessor, a possible common ancestor to both Neanderthals and modern humans, tell a story without words. The fractures on these 800,000-year-old remains are not random. They mirror precisely the patterns found on the bones of deer and other prey animals, excavated from the same site. The long bones are cracked open for marrow. The telltale cut marks of stone tools striate the surfaces where muscle once clung. This was not a haphazard act of violence, it was systematic butchery. The Neanderthals, our thick-browed cousins, left similar records. Their bones, too, sometimes show signs of being defleshed, disarticulated, and processed. This moves the concept from the abstract realm of biological possibility into the concrete reality of our shared past. It proves that the violence was not always external, not always arrayed by a faceless enemy from the next valley. The hand that wielded the tool, the teeth that scraped the bone, may well have belonged to someone known. A member of the same extended family, the same clan, the same small, interdependent band huddled against a vast and indifferent world. The home fire, the central hearth around which stories were told and bonds were forged, could also be the fire over which this most forbidden meat was roasted. The ultimate betrayal, it seems, is not a modern invention, but an ancient potential. If the circle of kin could so easily become the circle of prey, what does that say about the very foundation of our social bonds? This ancient shadow is not confined to the dusty pages of archaeology textbooks. It stretches its long fingers into the stark, fluorescent light of the modern world. We have built civilizations, laws, and religions that explicitly forbid such acts, yet the underlying impulse toward intrafamilial violence persists in a different, yet no less devastating form. The daily news cycle offers a grim litany: domestic abuse, child neglect, and, in its most extreme horror, familicide. The home, marketed as a safe haven, a private paradise, can become a sealed chamber of terror. The psychological mechanisms are eerily familiar: the elimination of a perceived burden, the violent assertion of dominance and control, the warped idea of purifying a family unit through the destruction of one of its parts. The tools have changed from sharpened flint to blunt instruments and firearms, but the outcome is a similar severing of the most sacred trust. This is not to equate every instance of domestic violence with prehistoric cannibalism, but to recognize that both spring from a same dark wellspring in our nature: the capacity to see a family member as an object, an obstacle, or a resource to be exploited is a haunting thread that connects the cave to the suburban house. We have civilized the act, but have we tamed the impulse? Or have we merely sublimated it into forms that are less literal but equally destructive to the human spirit? This leads us to a precipice of doubt. If the family unit, in its most primordial form, could simultaneously be the source of our greatest protection and our most intimate betrayal, can we ever truly speak of it as sacred? The word sacred implies something inviolable, pure, and set apart from the corrupting forces of the world. The evidence, both ancient and contemporary, suggests the opposite. It suggests that the family is perhaps the most human of all institutions, deeply flawed, riven by the same conflicts that define the natural world, and capable of harboring both sublime love and abysmal cruelty within the same walls. Its sanctity is not a preordained state, but a fragile achievement, a constant struggle against the darker angels of our inheritance. It is a choice made every day, not a guarantee written in blood. Perhaps the ideal of the sacred family is not a memory of what we were, but an aspiration of what we must constantly fight to become. If its sanctity is not a given, but a battle fought and won with every act of kindness, does that make it more or less valuable? Perhaps the answer, the way out of this bleak equation, lies not in denying this dual nature, but in understanding what else the family became. For it was never only a biological arrangement, a mere strategy for genetic survival, or a dangerous compact between predator and prey. Around those same fires where shadows danced, something else was being passed from hand to hand, from mind to mind, down the long, unbroken chain of generations. It was not just meat, but meaning. The family's true evolution may not be found in the evidence of what was consumed, but in what was carefully, tenderly, preserved and passed on. What if the most important thing we ever did around the fire was not to eat, but to teach? The stone is cold and rough under the palm, a stark contrast to the warm, living hand that presses against it. A small hand, its fingers splayed, is outlined in ochre and charcoal. Beside it, a larger one, their edges almost touching. Just beyond, a herd of bison thunders across the rock face, their powerful legs frozen in a perpetual gallop, their spirits captured in a dance of mineral and fire. A human figure, stick-like, dances nearby. These are not mere images. They are echoes. A chorus of voices from the deep past, whispering across millennia. In the flickering torchlight of a forgotten cave, with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke thick in the air, could we be witnessing the very first classroom? Was this, in the profound silence of the subterranean world, humanity's original school? Our story begins not with a thought, but with a biological mandate. The human brain, this intricate web of neurons, did not evolve in a vacuum. It was sculpted by the relentless pressures of survival, and its greatest evolutionary trick was its prolonged plasticity. Unlike other creatures, born with instincts hardwired and ready, a human infant enters the world breathtakingly unfinished. Its skull is soft, its mind a vessel waiting to be filled. This vulnerability is our strength. The neural architecture is primed for one primary function: to watch, to imitate, to learn. A child's gaze locks onto a parent's face, tracing the movement of lips forming sounds that will eventually coalesce into words. Little eyes follow the hands that chip a stone tool, that weave a basket, that point to the tracks of a prey animal. This is not passive observation. It is an active, biological imperative. Every mirrored gesture, every successfully copied action, forges a new synaptic connection. It is a silent, relentless transfer of software, the accumulated knowledge of generations, uploaded into the hardware of a new mind. This transfer, from experienced adult to unformed youth, was quite literally a matter of life and death. Knowing which berry was poisonous, which stream held fish, how to read the warning cry of a bird, these were lessons written in survival. The family unit, in its most primal form, became the first and most critical information network. The cost of a broken connection was extinction. This biological impulse found its voice on the walls of places like Lascaux and Chauvet. To dismiss these galleries as simple hunting manuals is to see only the surface of a deep, dark pool. The paintings are too detailed, too reverent, too bursting with a spirit that transcends the utilitarian. They are located deep within the earth, in chambers that required effort and intention to reach. This was not casual graffiti. This was a sacred space. Imagine the scene: the flicker of animal fat lamps casting living shadows over the painted beasts, making them breathe and shudder on the rock. The air vibrates with the low chant of elders, the wide-eyed attention of children. Here, an old one points to the specific placement of a bison's heart, teaching the lethal strike. But here, too, they speak of the spirit of the bison, of the need for respect, of the story of the hunt that will be sung after the meat is consumed. It is a holistic education. The techniques of the body, how to throw a spear, are woven seamlessly with the codes of the spirit, why we thank the animal for its life. The family, the clan, is the center of this universe of meaning. The information flows down the generations, not through abstract texts, but through shared experience, through ritual, through symbol and story etched in firelight against a canvas of stone. The connection is visceral, direct, and profoundly emotional. It is the original curriculum, written in a language of image and awe. The thread that begins in that smoky cave stretches unbroken into the present day, though its form has transformed. The flickering torchlight has been replaced by the cool glow of a tablet screen. The rock wall is now the page of a textbook, the television screen, the digital interface. Yet, the fundamental transaction remains unchanged. The family hearth is still the primary forge where worldviews are shaped. A parent reading a bedtime story is performing a ritual as ancient as any in Chauvet. They are transmitting language, narrative, morality, and the cadence of human emotion into a waiting mind. The simple act of a child helping a parent cook becomes a lesson in chemistry, tradition, and love. We teach our young the symbolic codes of our modern world, the meanings of street signs, the unspoken rules of social interaction, the values we hold dear. The classroom extends the work of the home, but it rarely replaces its primal foundational role. The SIB may learn algebra at school, but they learn empathy, fear, courage, and hope within the complex emotional web of the family. The tools have evolved from pigment and stone to fiber optics and silicon, but the impulse to pass the torch of understanding is a direct inheritance from those deep-time artists. Yet, this elegant system rests on a precarious biological paradox. If the raw, driving imperative of evolution is simply to propagate one's genes, to mate and spread one's DNA, then why stay? The biological script for so many species is brutally simple: procreate and depart. The energy required to raise slow-maturing, incredibly vulnerable human offspring is staggering. It demands years of relentless investment: food, protection, teaching. This investment represents a massive diversion of resources that could otherwise be channeled into seeking further mating opportunities. The cold calculus of natural selection would seem to favor the absentee parent, the one who sires and vanishes, leaving the other to bear the immense cost. So what breaks this calculus? What invisible force tethers a parent to the exhausting, often thankless task of nurturing? What overrides the simpler, selfish impulse to move on? The answer seems to lie in a mysterious and overwhelming cocktail of emotions we have come to call love. But is this feeling merely a poetic flourish, a cultural construct? Or is it itself a sophisticated evolutionary tool? Perhaps love is the biological weapon evolution developed to solve the problem of parental investment. It is the glue that holds the teachers in the classroom of life long enough to complete the lesson. What if the profound bond between parent and child, the aching need to protect and nurture, is manufactured deep within the most ancient parts of our brain? When a parent looks at their child, a complex alchemy of neurotransmitters floods the system. Dopamine, the molecule of reward and craving, creates a feedback loop of joy in the child's presence. Oxytocin, the hormone of bonding, released through touch, through gaze, through the very act of caregiving, forges an irresistible connection, a chemical leash of devotion. This is not a gentle suggestion. It is a powerful biological mandate, as potent as hunger or thirst. It transforms the exhausting duty of parenting into a need, and the fulfillment of that need into a pleasure. The helpless infant becomes the most powerful object in the universe, commanding absolute loyalty through a silent chemical symphony. This emotional bond ensures the survival of the most vulnerable and knowledge-dependent species on Earth. But in this elegant solution, did evolution merely build a cage of chemicals to ensure a biological duty? Or did it, in its blind mechanistic process, accidentally unlock the key to our deepest humanity? Is the love that fuels a lullaby, that inspires a sacrifice, that paints a hand on a cave wall, just a trick of the chemistry within us? Why do we love? Is it a transcendent emotion, a poetic flight of the soul, or is it something far more primal, a biological weapon, exquisitely crafted by evolution, to bind parents together in the shared, monumental task of raising a child? This question hangs in the air, a delicate balance between the romantic and the ruthlessly pragmatic. We feel love as a deeply personal, almost spiritual experience, yet its origins might be found not in the stars, but in the stark, survival-driven logic of our own DNA. It is a force that can build civilizations and shatter hearts, but perhaps its most fundamental purpose is to serve as the invisible cradle for the next generation. Beneath the surface of whispered promises and racing hearts lies a complex chemical symphony, a recipe for attachment written in the language of neurotransmitters. This is the first layer of our story, the biological machinery humming quietly in the background of every grand romance. Dopamine, that famed molecule of craving and reward, floods the system, creating a state of focused desire, an addiction to the presence of the beloved. It is the engine of obsession, the reason a new love can feel so all-consuming, so necessary. But obsession is a fleeting fire. It needs a slower, more enduring agent to transform it into something lasting. This is where oxytocin enters, the so-called cuddle hormone. Released through touch, through intimacy, through the shared gaze between a parent and a newborn, it forges bonds of deep trust and calm connection. It is the biological mortar of a relationship. Alongside it works vasopressin, a less celebrated but equally crucial player, particularly in males, where it is linked to territorial behavior, pair bonding, and protective instincts. Together, this potent cocktail, dopamine's drive, oxytocin's warmth, vasopressin's guard, creates a powerful glue. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, this isn't about poetry. It's a strategic alliance. For a human infant, born remarkably vulnerable and dependent after a long gestation, survival historically depended on more than one caregiver. This chemical bond, this thing we call love, is nature's ingenious strategy to keep a pair together long enough to see their most precious genetic investment through its most defenseless years. The euphoria of romance, then, might simply be the beautiful, intoxicating bait for a much longer, more demanding contract. Is the sublime feeling of being in love merely an elegant trick, a biological imperative wearing the mask of destiny? If this bond is indeed an ancient, hardwired strategy, we should find its echoes not just in our blood, but in our bones. The archaeological record offers tantalizing silent testimony to love's long history. Consider the rare and poignant discovery of dual burials, where two skeletons are found interred together, often in an embrace that has endured for millennia. One famous example, the lovers of Valdaro, a Neolithic couple buried near Mantua, Italy, locked in an eternal clasp for over 6,000 years, speaks a wordless language across the centuries. What were they to each other? Their posture suggests a connection so profound it was honored in death, a bond that their community recognized and sought to preserve even in the afterlife. Beyond single finds, anthropological studies of hunter-gatherer societies, our best window into deep prehistory, show that while social structures varied, long-term pair bonds were a common and stable feature. These partnerships provided a reliable framework for cooperation, the man providing protein through hunting, the woman providing gathered calories and primary care, both creating a stable environment for slow-maturing offspring. This evidence suggests that the impulse to form a lasting attachment is not a recent cultural invention, like the novel or the sonnet. It appears to be a far older, deeply embedded tool of natural selection. The feeling we compartmentalize as romance might be the personal, conscious experience of an evolutionary strategy that has, for tens of thousands of years, ensured that a child has more than one set of hands to hold them. Does this ancient provenance make our love more meaningful or simply more inevitable? In our modern world, with its dizzying array of choices and its redefinition of family structures, this ancient biological imperative has not vanished. It has simply put on new clothes. The entire architecture of the nuclear family, the cultural obsession with romantic love as the foundation for marriage, the multi-billion-dollar industries of dating and weddings, all of these can be seen as elaborate cultural extensions of that primal drive. We have built cathedrals and written symphonies to honor a feeling that, at its root, ensures cooperative parenting. Our laws revolve around it, governing inheritance and parental rights. Our stories are obsessed with it. Yet, for the individual, it feels nothing like a strategy. It feels like a discovery, a unique and personal revolution. This is the fascinating duality of human love. It is simultaneously a deeply subjective emotional experience and a profound biological legacy. We seek a soulmate, but our biology may be seeking a co-parent. We yearn for connection, and in doing so, we unknowingly continue a chain of care that stretches back to the dawn of our species. In an age of increasing individualism, does this ancient pull toward partnership represent a constraint on our freedom, or the very thing that gives our lives their deepest meaning? Yet, if love is this flawless, hardwired biological mechanism for ensuring parental investment, why does it so often fail? Why does infidelity exist? Why do relationships fracture? The existence of betrayal and the practice of polygamy in various cultures seem to fly in the face of this neat narrative. This is the essential counterpoint, the complication in our story. It reveals that evolution is not a moralist. It is a strategist. It does not demand perfection, but rather it plays the odds. The same evolutionary pressures that favored pair bonding to protect vulnerable young may have also favored a degree of opportunistic mating, particularly in males, to spread genetic material more widely. For females in certain contexts, seeking genetic diversity or resources from outside a primary pair might have conferred advantages to offspring. This isn't about justifying unethical behavior. It is about recognizing that our biology is not a monolith. It is a tapestry of often competing impulses, the drive for stable attachment versus the drive for opportunistic propagation, the desire for a dedicated partner versus the curiosity for another. The existence of cheating doesn't disprove the biological basis of love. It simply proves that love is not the only strategy in evolution's toolkit. It introduces a tension, a paradox at the heart of our nature. If love is the cradle, what is the name of the impulse that threatens to tip it over? This tension leads us to a threshold, to the edge of a deeper question. If the bond of love is the primary strategy, then the fear of its breach must have shaped us just as profoundly. The potential for infidelity introduces a shadow, a risk that evolution would have had to account for. For a male investing immense resources in a child, the ultimate biological catastrophe is to invest in offspring that are not his own. This fear, this primal uncertainty, must have forged its own set of behaviors, behaviors of assurance, of possession, of guarantee. So, if love is the glue, what intricate and often darker mechanisms did evolution devise to protect that bond from within? How does a biological strategy police itself? Is monogamy a moral triumph, a social contract, or something written in our very bones? We often frame fidelity as a question of character, a testament to willpower over base desire. But what if this deeply human struggle is not a battle between virtue and vice, but an ancient, evolutionary whisper? What if the urge to be faithful and its frequent undoing are both part of the same primordial blueprint for survival? To understand this, we must step back from the fraught language of sin and betrayal and see our species through a colder, wider lens. In the vast mammalian family, we are a curious anomaly. The common strategy is for males to spread their seed as widely as possible, investing little, while females bear the immense cost of gestation and nurturing. It is a system of fleeting connections, of genetic lotteries. Yet here we are, a species that builds entire civilizations around the idea of a lasting pair bond. This was not a sudden moral awakening. It was a slow, grinding adaptation to a new kind of problem. Our ancestors faced a unique challenge. Our offspring are born spectacularly helpless. Their brains are underdeveloped, their bodies fragile, their childhoods impossibly long. This extended period of vulnerability demanded a new solution. A mother alone, tasked with both provisioning and protection for years on end, would be stretched to her limits. The survival of the child, and thus the continuation of the genetic line, came to hinge on a simple, brutal biological equation: paternity certainty. If a male could be sure the child was his, His investment of time, energy, and resources was a sound genetic bargain. If he was uncertain, that investment could be evolutionarily wasted, poured into rival DNA. And so, the calculus of fidelity began. It was less about love in its modern romantic sense, and more about a pragmatic, unconscious guarantee. The pair bond became a biological contract, a way for a female to secure vital, sustained investment for her young, and for a male to ensure that his investment was not in vain. This is the deep, unspoken foundation upon which so much of our social architecture is built, not on a dream of eternal romance, but on the hard, practical need to raise the impossibly demanding creatures we call children. This biological impulse found its expression in the earliest stirrings of human community. Archaeological evidence and studies of remaining hunter-gatherer societies suggest that these pair bonds were the glue that held the first fragile groups together. Life was a precarious balance of scarce resources and constant threat. In such a world, unchecked sexual competition could be catastrophic, tearing apart the social fabric with jealousy, violence, and conflict. A stable pairing was a social technology, a way to manage this potentially destructive force. It created clear lines of responsibility, of kinship, and of alliance. It was a way to build a unit that could function cooperatively within a larger whole. The bond was a cradle for the child, but also a cornerstone for the tribe. It was a pact that said, "We will face the world together, and in doing so, we make the entire group stronger." The emotional connection we now call love may have been the beautiful internal reward mechanism that evolved to make us want to uphold this vital, practical arrangement. The flutter in the heart, the deep sense of attachment. These were not mere poetry, but evolutionary incentives, encouraging us to stay for the long, difficult haul. In our modern world, we have dressed this ancient machinery in the elaborate garments of law, religion, and romantic idealism. Monogamous marriage is the dominant model across countless cultures, held up as a moral and social ideal. We recite vows, sign contracts, and celebrate the power of everlasting love. Yet, if we scrape away the top layer of ceremony, the underlying biological architecture remains startlingly visible. The institution still primarily serves to create a stable environment for raising children, a unit for pooling resources, and providing emotional security. Our moral norms around fidelity shift and change with the centuries, bending to new economic realities and social movements. But the deep biological roots, the drive for certainty, the need for extended parental investment, are tenacious and enduring. They are the old, steady current flowing beneath the sparkling, changing surface of the water. This leads us to the inevitable complicating counterpoint. If monogamy is such a powerful evolutionary strategy, why is its opposite, infidelity and polygyny, so persistently present across human societies? Why does the temptation to stray seem to be a near universal companion to the vow to stay? The existence of these practices is not a flaw in the theory, but a confirmation of its complex depth. They represent a different, parallel strategy in the same evolutionary playbook. For a male in a position of power or wealth, taking multiple mates can be a way to maximize his genetic legacy, spreading his genes more widely. For a female, an affair with a genetically superior male, while maintaining the stable investment of her primary partner, can be a risky but potentially rewarding gamble, a phenomenon biologists call dual mating strategy. This is not a matter of one strategy being right and the other wrong in an evolutionary sense. It is a matter of context, opportunity, and cost-benefit analysis, written in the subconscious language of reproductive fitness. The tension we feel is the tension between these competing impulses, both of which are etched into our nature. The strict social enforcement of monogamy is a testament to how powerful and disruptive the pull of these alternative strategies can be. We make rules precisely because the urge to break them is so fundamental. So, we are left not with a simple answer, but with a richer, more tangled understanding. Fidelity is not a pristine, moral absolute, nor is it a mere biological imperative. It is a negotiated settlement between our deep need for stability and our latent drive for dispersal, between the cradle and the club, between the desire to nurture one certain future and the ancient whisper to sow many seeds. We built societies around the pair bond because it worked, because it allowed us to cross the dangerous plains of prehistory by ensuring our vulnerable young were not left behind. But the old strategies never truly vanished. They simply went underground, emerging in our stories, our temptations, and our compromises. Perhaps the real question is not why we struggle to be faithful, but how we ever managed to make faithfulness a cornerstone of our world at all. And if both the bond and the breach are part of our inheritance, what does that say about the nature of a promise, made not just by two people, but by the entire weight of our evolutionary past? Across the vast tapestry of human societies, a bewildering array of marital blueprints unfolds. In many, a single man stands with multiple wives. In a scattered few, a single woman is partnered with several husbands. And threading through almost all of them, a near-universal constant persists: the secret liaison, the hidden affair, the whispered betrayal. This pervasive reality forces a profound and unsettling question. Is the modern, monogamous nuclear family the ultimate social destiny of our species? Or is it merely one fragile strategy among countless others in the grand, evolutionary playbook? The story begins not in a courthouse or a church, but deep within our biological code, in the ancient and ruthless calculus of reproduction. From this stark perspective, the motivations are stripped of their cultural finery, revealing a primal logic. For a male of countless species, including our own ancestors, the equation is brutally simple. More partners can, in theory, translate to more offspring, a greater genetic legacy echoing into the future. Polygyny, one male, multiple females, becomes a powerful engine for spreading his genes. Adultery, from this vantage point, offers a similar, if stealthier, prize. It is a clandestine strategy for a male to access additional reproductive opportunities without the burden of provisioning or protecting another entire family. For a female, the cold math suggests a different but equally compelling incentive. Even within a partnership, an affair with a male perceived as genetically superior, stronger, smarter, more resilient, could potentially yield offspring with a better chance of survival. It is a silent, desperate gamble for a better genetic lottery ticket for her children. Yet this biological gamble is never free. It is a high-stakes game played on a knife's edge. For every potential genetic reward, there exists a monumental risk, the catastrophic cost of discovery. The same evolutionary pressures that forged these opportunistic urges also forged the devastating emotional weaponry to counter them: jealousy, rage, and the potential for explosive violence. The drive to ensure one's own paternity is a shadow that forever follows the drive to spread one's seed. So, are we merely witnessing the chaotic fallout of competing Darwinian impulses, a permanent war of the genes fought in the human heart? This biological script found its stage and its most dramatic expression in the dawn of civilization itself. As humans transitioned from nomadic bands to settled agricultural societies, wealth accumulated. Land, grain, and livestock became concentrated in the hands of a powerful few. And with this material revolution came a social one. Polygyny was slowly divorced from pure reproductive strategy and intricately woven into the fabric of power, status, and property. It became a living emblem of dominance. A king or chieftain with a vast harem was not merely satisfying a personal desire, he was performing a public spectacle of his potency. He was demonstrating his ability to protect and provide for countless dependents, a display of wealth so absolute he could share it with many. This power is etched in stone and buried in the earth. The tombs of ancient Mesopotamian rulers, Egyptian pharaohs, and Chinese emperors are not just final resting places. They are silent, sprawling narratives of status. They often contain not one, but multiple female skeletons, companions for the afterlife, eternal witnesses to his earthly dominion. Historical records from Babylon to Byzantium are filled with accounts of concubines, secondary wives, and intricate palace politics centered on the ruler's favor. Here, the multiple partnership was no longer a hidden biological strategy, but a conspicuous cultural crown. But what does this monumentalization of polygyny tell us about the lives of the unnamed, the common people? Was this a universal dream, or was it always a privilege of the pinnacle, a stark reminder that for most, the reality was a struggle for a single, stable union? The modern world, at least on the surface, presents a unified front. Monogamous marriage is enshrined in law, celebrated in culture, and preached from pulpits as the moral and social ideal. It is the foundation upon which we attempt to build the nuclear family. Yet the ancient whispers have not been silenced. They have simply been forced underground, adapting to new technologies and new social norms. The drive persists, but its expression has mutated. Adultery did not vanish with the wedding ring. It migrated to shadowed corners of the internet, to discreet dating apps designed for affairs, to business trips and secret apartments. The soaring rates of divorce, so often catalyzed by infidelity, and the endless, sorrowful narratives that fill court documents and therapy sessions, all point to a profound and persistent tension. They suggest that our deep-seated evolutionary instincts are a powerful, subterranean river, constantly flowing beneath the neat paved streets of our social conventions. Our modern structures attempt to dam this river, to channel it into a single narrow course. But the water pressure continues to build, seeking any crack, any weakness, to find its own ancient path. Has civilization truly tamed our nature? Or have we simply become more sophisticated, more secretive, and perhaps more guilt-ridden in our expression of it? This leads to a deeply uncomfortable counterpoint. If these urges for multiple partners are so ingrained, so widespread across time and culture, what does that say about the very institution we hold as sacrosanct? Is the monogamous family the natural, enduring bedrock of human society? Or is it a fragile, recent, and perhaps unnatural imposition? A temporary and tense truce, nervously negotiated between the wild, untamable horses of our biological heritage and the brittle fences of our social norms. We built the fence to contain the horses, but the horse's power is what makes the fence seem so terrifyingly fragile. Is the family, then, not a serene garden but a constant, quiet battlefield? And on that battlefield, the most devastating weapons are often deployed not by strangers, but by those who love each other most. This tension inevitably leads us into the darkest corners of the human experience, the searing pain of betrayal, the green-eyed monster of jealousy, and the shocking violence that can erupt within the very home that is supposed to be a sanctuary. It forces us to consider the most unthinkable of acts. There are fathers, consumed by a doubt as old as time, who have committed the ultimate violence against the children they have raised, driven by a maddening suspicion that the child does not carry their genes. This is a horror that seems to defy all reason, all humanity. Yet, could this too have a ghost of an explanation in our deep past? Is the raw, uncontrollable emotion of rage, the cuckold's fury, not just a social failing, but a brutal, Darwinian adaptation? A fierce, primordial mechanism designed to protect a male's genetic investment at any cost, to eliminate any resource-draining young that are not his own? If so, does this make the emotion any less real, or any more forgivable? Are we, in our most passionate and destructive moments, merely puppets performing a play written by our ancestors, our strings pulled by genes fighting for a future we will never see? The act is almost too monstrous to comprehend. A father, the very figure meant to be a protector, a source of safety, ends the life he helped create. The trigger is often a whisper, a doubt, a shadow of suspicion that the child is not his own. It feels like a uniquely human evil, a profound moral collapse. But what if this darkness is not born solely in the individual human heart? What if it echoes with the ghost of a much older, colder logic? To understand the depth of this betrayal, we must first leave the confines of human morality and travel into the raw, unfeeling arithmetic of the natural world. Here, the concept of infanticide is not a crime. It is a strategy. Consider the new Lion King, his mane a crown won through violence, taking over a pride. His first official act is often to seek out and kill all the cubs sired by his predecessor. The mother lions, driven by a biological imperative to invest in viable offspring, will soon come into estrus again, ready to carry his genes forward. This brutal calculus ensures his genetic legacy, wiping the slate clean of a rival's investment. It is a horrific act through our eyes, but through the lens of evolution, it is ruthlessly efficient. It is a club used to secure a cradle. In this realm, paternity is not a social contract, but a biological imperative. The male invests immense resources, protection, food, care, and that investment must yield a genetic return. Uncertainty is an unacceptable risk. Could it be that the searing, all-consuming fire of male jealousy, a force that has fueled countless human tragedies, is not just an emotion but an ancient, hardwired alarm system? A biological warning bell clanging against the potential of raising a rival's DNA, of pouring one's life into an evolutionary dead end? This cold logic did not vanish at the dawn of humanity. It may have simply put on new clothes. The archaeological record, our only window into the deep past, offers silent, stony testimony. Among the remains of ancient settlements, nestled beside evidence of care and community, we sometimes find a more sinister story. The small, fragile skeletons of children, their bones bearing the unmistakable marks of violent trauma. A skull fractured by a blunt force, a ribcage shattered. These are not casualties of war or accident, but of intimate violence. They suggest that the prehistoric hearth was not always a place of uniform warmth and safety. It was also a crucible where competing genetic interests could collide with terrible force. The family unit, so often romanticized as humanity's first and greatest cooperative, was also a landscape of potential conflict, a tense negotiation between the drive to protect one's own and the terrifying suspicion of the other within one's own home. What does it say about our foundations that the evidence of care is so often found interred with the evidence of its most profound violation? And this ancient echo has not faded into silence. It reverberates in our modern world, translated into the stark, heartbreaking headlines of family annihilations and domestic violence. A man, seized by the paranoid conviction that he has been cuckolded, turns his home into a slaughterhouse. We process these events as isolated psychological breakdowns, as the acts of monstrous individuals. And they are. Yet, might they also be the catastrophic malfunction of an ancient biological script? The raw evolutionary impulse to ensure genetic certainty, stripped of all cultural constraints and moral reasoning, erupting with primitive fury. The tragedy is a social one, a profound human failing, but its roots may tap into a deeper, darker stratum of our being. Is our modern pain sometimes just the ancient conflict of genes playing out its terrible drama on a stage of contemporary life? But this cannot be the whole story. To see humanity only through this lens of cold biological determinism is to paint a picture that is incomplete, a portrait missing its soul. For if we are merely vessels for the selfish replication of genes, then how do we explain the father who adopts a child and loves it unconditionally as his own? How do we explain the profound, self-sacrificing love that leads a parent to give a kidney, to run into a burning building, to spend a lifetime in devoted care for a disabled child who offers no genetic future at all? These acts of pure, illogical, magnificent love are the absolute antithesis of the infanticidal impulse. They are a defiance of the very arithmetic of natural selection. They are the proof that we are more than just our biology. We build cultures, we create moral codes, we are capable of love that transcends genetic self-interest. So where does this leave us? Are we pawns of a primordial instinct, or are we authors of our own humanity, capable of rewriting our deepest programming? Perhaps the truth of human connection, of love and family, resides not in one or the other, but in the constant, tense negotiation between them. Our relationships are not purely biological contracts, nor are they purely cultural inventions. They are a complex alloy, forged in the fires of millions of years of evolution and shaped by the conscious choices we make every day. The modern family, in all its varied forms, is not a static institution, but a living, breathing testament to this negotiation. It is the ongoing struggle between the ancient, whispering impulse to protect our own genetic legacy and the hard-won, beautiful capacity to love without condition, to choose connection over biology, to build rather than to destroy. So the next time we feel the pang of jealousy or the swell of unconditional love, we are feeling the two poles of a vast human experience. We are creatures caught between the deep past and an imagined future, between the instinct to preserve a bloodline and the yearning to build a legacy of love. Is the greatest human achievement, then, not the triumph of one over the other, but the daily quiet victory of choosing which voice to listen to? When two people come together, drawn by an invisible force that feels both deeply personal and universally familiar, we call it love. We write poems about it, sing songs of its agony and ecstasy, and build our lives around its promise. But what if this most intimate of feelings, this profound connection of the heart, is also the product of a silent, ancient negotiation? What if the yearning for a partner is not just a matter of the soul, but the result of a biological contract written in the language of hormones and honed by the relentless pressures of survival? Is the bond we celebrate a choice of free will, or a sophisticated arrangement of genes and evolutionary strategy, a clever trick played by nature to ensure we stay long enough to care for the next generation? The biology of attachment is a story written in chemicals. It begins with a lightning strike, dopamine flooding the reward centers of the brain, painting the world in vibrant hues of possibility. This is the dizzying, obsessive high of new love, a state not unlike a carefully calibrated intoxication. It's a powerful lure, designed to bring two people close. But that initial spark is fleeting. For the bond to last, to become something that can withstand the inevitable challenges of time, a deeper biochemistry takes over. Oxytocin, the so-called cuddle hormone, builds a quieter, more enduring connection through touch, through shared moments, through the simple act of being together. It is the chemical mortar for the bricks of a shared life. Meanwhile, vasopressin promotes protective, territorial behaviors, the deep-seated urge to provide and defend. This is not the stuff of sonnets, it is a precise neurochemical protocol. The evolutionary purpose of this entire elaborate system seems starkly practical, to tether two individuals together just long enough to raise a child through its most vulnerable years. In the eyes of natural selection, a pair bond is a remarkably efficient survival unit. The intense, almost painful love a parent feels for their offspring is the primary motivator. The love between partners might simply be the biological contract that ensures there are two dedicated caregivers instead of one. So, is love just nature's elegant tool for enforcing a temporary co-parenting agreement? If we are merely acting out a program written for the benefit of our genes, does that make the feeling any less real to the heart that feels it? To understand the depth of this contract, we must listen to the whispers from the dust. The archaeological record offers a fragmented but revealing testimony of our ancestral families. There is no single, timeless blueprint etched in stone. Instead, we find a stunning diversity of arrangements, each a pragmatic answer to the brutal question of survival. In some frozen landscapes, small, tight-knit family groups huddled together for warmth and protection, sharing resources and childcare. In the fertile crescents of early civilization, larger tribal structures emerged where a child might be raised by a network of aunts, uncles, and cousins, their concept of parent fluid and broad. There is evidence of polygamous societies where alliances and resources were consolidated, and of monogamous pairs struggling to carve out a living on the edge of a forest. The common thread weaving through these varied tapestries of life is not romance, nor a universal ideal of marriage. It is the relentless, unwavering drive to optimize the chances of survival for the young. The structure of the family was a tool, and it was shaped and reshaped by environment, resource scarcity, and social necessity. The bonds that held these groups together were undoubtedly infused with affection and loyalty, but their fundamental architecture was designed by the cold calculus of survival. They were experiments in living, each one asking the same fundamental question: what arrangement best gets us all through the winter? If our ancestors could see our modern preoccupation with one right way to form a family, would they be baffled by our lack of imagination? This ancient biological imperative did not vanish with the advent of modern society. It simply learned to wear new clothes. Today, the raw biological drive for pair bonding is enmeshed in a complex web of law, economics, and cultural narrative. We have institutionalized the biological contract into a social one called marriage, complete with legal benefits, tax implications, and religious sanctification. We tell ourselves a powerful story that we marry for love, and for love alone, a concept that, in its current romantic form, is a surprisingly recent invention in human history. For centuries, marriage was primarily an economic and political transaction, a way to merge lands, secure alliances, or continue a bloodline. The idea that it should be based on mutual affection and personal fulfillment is a modern luxury, born from relative security and prosperity. Yet even this most authentic form of love-based union still serves the ancient purpose. The legal framework of marriage still creates a stable unit for raising children, for pooling resources, for providing mutual support. It is the biological contract, codified. Our culture sells us the fairy tale of romantic destiny, a story so potent it makes the underlying biological and economic machinery almost invisible. We feel we are choosing a partner solely with our hearts, unaware of the ancient whispering pressures that guide our preferences, our attractions, our very definition of compatibility. So, is the modern pursuit of love truly a rebellion against a biological contract, or just its most sophisticated and beautifully disguised iteration? This line of questioning inevitably leads to a profound challenge. If the family is, and always has been, a malleable structure shaped by survival needs, then can there ever be a single, natural, or standard model? The very notion of a nuclear family, mother, father, and children living in isolated autonomy, begins to look less like a timeless truth and more like a specific adaptation to a particular moment in industrial and economic history. It is a configuration that served certain purposes for a certain time, but is it the only answer? Or even the best one? The biological contract may be real, but its terms are astonishingly flexible. It does not dictate a specific cast of characters, only a desired outcome: the nurturing and protection of the young. This realization opens onto a wider horizon of understanding, a landscape where the family unit is revealed not as a rigid statue, but as a flowing river, constantly changing its course to meet the terrain. Across cultures and throughout time, children have been raised successfully by a breathtaking variety of caregivers. There are villages where, as the proverb goes, it takes an entire community to raise a child. There are societies where grandparents are the primary pillars of a child's world, repositories of wisdom and stability. There are families built by single mothers, by pairs of aunts, by close-knit circles of friends who choose to become kin. The bond that matters, the one that fulfills the deepest function of the biological contract, is not necessarily a romantic bond between two biological parents. It is the consistent, caring presence of committed adults. The family, then, is not a fixed formula, but a dynamic, resilient concept, a shelter built from love and responsibility, regardless of its architectural style. If the purpose is survival and flourishing, then the nuclear model is merely one option in a vast and varied human toolkit. Perhaps the most important question is not whether our relationships are dictated by biology or chosen by free will, but whether we have the courage to embrace the full, flexible spectrum of ways to fulfill our deepest contract of care. And if the modern nuclear family is just one temporary answer, one fleeting shape in the long story of human connection, what other forms might we yet imagine, and which ancient ones have we forgotten? We often picture a family as a fixed constellation, a mother, a father, and their children orbiting a shared sun of love and conflict. This image feels ancient, a biological imperative etched into our very bones. But what if this familiar picture is not a universal law, but a fleeting reflection in a much larger, more turbulent river of human connection? In countless corners of the world, and indeed throughout the deep time of our history, children are raised by grandparents, aunts, uncles, and even an entire village. Could it be that the nuclear family we hold so sacred is merely a modern illusion, a temporary and fragile vessel on the vast ocean of how we care for our young? The biological truth of our species whispers a different story, one written not in the language of social norms, but in the hard code of evolutionary strategy. For Homo sapiens, the most successful child-rearing technique is not fierce, solitary parental guarding, but a practice known to science as alloparenting. This is the act of nurturing offspring by individuals who are not their biological parents. Imagine our ancient ancestors on the African savanna. A mother, burdened with a helpless infant who demands years of intense care, is vulnerable. Her ability to forage, to work, to simply survive is drastically reduced. But within a tight-knit group, others step in. An aunt carries the child for an afternoon. A grandmother shares gathered fruits. An unrelated tribesman teaches the boy to track a rabbit. This collective effort lightens the immense load, increasing the survival chances of both the mother and her child. This was our great evolutionary advantage over other primates, whose parental investments are often more singular and intense. Our cradle was not held by two pairs of hands, but by many. This network of care allowed us to thrive, to innovate, to spread across the globe. So, if our biology is wired for shared parenting, why do we so fiercely cling to the myth of the nuclear unit as the one true model? The evidence is not just in our genes, but buried in the very soil of our past. Archaeology offers silent, yet profound testimony to this fluidity of family. Excavations of early Neolithic villages reveal settlements built not for isolated pairs, but for communities. The remnants of hearths are large and central, suggesting shared meals and collective living. Analysis of burial sites sometimes shows children interred not with a single set of adults presumed to be parents, but surrounded by a variety of individuals of different ages and sexes. The artifacts of daily life, stone tools, pottery, ornaments, speak of a society where skills and knowledge were passed down through many channels, not just a direct genetic line. In these first fragile villages, a child belonged to the group. Their safety was the community's priority, their education the community's project, their future the community's investment. The village was the family, its borders defined by cooperation and mutual survival, not solely by blood. What does this ancient blueprint tell us about the loneliness sometimes felt within the four walls of a modern suburban home? This village did not vanish with the advent of agriculture or the rise of cities. It simply transformed. Our modern world is still fundamentally built upon this same model of collective child-rearing, though we often dress it in different names. We hand our infants to daycare workers, their first alloparents in a sterile, brightly lit room. We entrust their minds to teachers, a rotating cast of mentors who shape their worldview for hours each day. We rely on coaches, scout leaders, and the parents of our children's friends to provide lessons in teamwork, courage, and friendship. And on a larger scale, we have built immense social welfare systems, public health services, schools, child benefits, a societal agreement that the well-being of the next generation is a collective responsibility, not merely a private one. The nuclear family, then, is not the default. It is but one fragile cell within the much larger and resilient organism of the community. It has never truly existed in isolation. So why does the ideal persist with such stubborn and often guilt-inducing force? This fluidity forces a deeper, more unsettling question. If the structure of family is so malleable, stretching far beyond the biological parents, then what is the true glue that binds it? Is blood relation the ultimate, non-negotiable foundation, or can family be a choice, a commitment that transcends genetics? We see this question answered affirmatively every day in families built through adoption, in deep bonds formed between mentors and youth, in chosen families that provide sanctuary for those rejected by their biological kin. These relationships are no less powerful, no less loving, and often far more intentional. They suggest that the essence of family might not be a shared genetic code, but a shared story, a shared commitment to care. It is a bond forged in the daily acts of nurturing, not just in the single act of conception. Does this mean that love, not blood, is the deeper evolutionary advantage? To truly grasp this, we must look to the most vulnerable, to those who seemingly lack the very foundation of blood ties, the orphans of the deep past. In the silent language of bones and burial, what story do they tell? A child, alone. The wind carries the scent of pine and cold earth, but not the familiar smell of its mother. A rustle in the ferns is not the comforting footfall of its father returning with a haunch of meat, but perhaps the stealthy approach of a predator. In the brutal arithmetic of prehistory, an orphan's fate seems a simple equation, a subtraction with only zero as the answer. Their small bones, we might assume, would be the first to be scattered, lost to the elements, leaving no trace. Yet the earth tells a different story. In graves older than written language, we find them. Children laid to rest with care, surrounded by artifacts of value, sometimes beside adults who do not share their blood. These silent stones pose a quiet, thunderous question. In a world defined by survival of the fittest, did someone kneel in the dirt to offer a piece of fruit, a carved toy, a chance? Did the human heart, even then, understand a covenant that transcends the selfish gene? The biological impulse is, on its surface, a paradox. An organism's prime directive is to perpetuate its own genetic material. Investing precious resources, food, protection, energy, into an unrelated offspring would seem an evolutionary dead end, a drain on one's own lineage. Yet, we are a species built on contradiction. We are not solitary hunters but social creatures, our survival intricately woven into the fabric of the tribe. This is where the beautiful mechanism of alloparenting emerges. It is a word that sounds clinical, but contains a universe of care. Allo for other, parenting for the act itself. It is the aunt who shares her food, the uncle who teaches to nap flint, the elder with no children of her own who sings the old songs to a restless toddler. This network of care creates a safety net. For an orphan, it is the difference between a cold night and a warm one, between starvation and a shared meal. This behavior is not a calculated genetic strategy, but an emergent property of empathy, a profound extension of the nurturing instinct beyond its original narrow target. It is a leap of consciousness, the recognition of need itself, and the willingness to answer it, even when the crying child is not one's own. Does compassion, then, become a tool for survival, a biological advantage written not in individual genes but in the strength of the collective? The cold, hard evidence of this ancient empathy is etched in ochre and buried in time. Consider the archaeological site of Sungir, east of Moscow. Here, over 30,000 years ago, during the peak of the last ice age, people laid 3 of their own to rest. 2 were children, a boy and a girl, roughly 10 and 12 years old. They were not tucked away in a forgotten corner. Their grave was a spectacle of grief and respect, a testament to their value in the community. They were adorned with thousands of meticulously carved ivory beads that once covered their clothing, a project requiring thousands of hours of skilled labor. They were accompanied by spears crafted from mammoth tusks, formidable weapons that spoke of status and promise. The adults buried nearby received a fraction of this lavish send-off. The children of Sungir were profoundly important. Were they the chieftain's children? Perhaps. But the sheer scale of communal investment suggests something more. It suggests that these children belonged not just to a family, but to the entire group. Their potential, their lives, were considered a collective treasure worth honoring in death with an extravagance that defies the logic of mere day-to-day survival. What does it say about a society that invests so deeply in its future, even when that future is cut short? This ancient thread of collective responsibility, though frayed at times, runs unbroken into the modern world. Our complex systems of adoption, foster care, and social welfare are not inventions of a soft modern age. They are the institutional echoes of that primordial alloparenting impulse. We have codified the ancient urge to protect the vulnerable. We debate taxes for schools, create charities for orphaned children, and build legal frameworks to bind strangers into families. We have expanded the definition of kin to include those connected not by blood, but by law and love. This modern apparatus is our village, our tribe, scaled to the size of a nation. It is the acknowledgement that a child's right to safety, food, and love is not contingent on their genetic relation to a provider, but is a fundamental tenet of a functioning society. The question shifts from, are they mine? To, are they safe? Are they fed? Is this progress, then, merely the formalization of our oldest, best instinct? And yet, a stubborn, cynical voice whispers, why? Why would this instinct ever evolve? If nature is a ruthless game of gene propagation, wouldn't the individual who hoards resources for their own direct offspring outcompete the soft-hearted fool who feeds another's child? Shouldn't true altruism toward non-kin have been wiped from the gene pool before it could ever take hold? The very existence of the orphan cared for seems to defy the core logic of evolution. It presents a puzzle where the pieces of selfish biology and observed selflessness do not seem to fit. Is empathy, then, a glorious evolutionary mistake, a beautiful flaw that somehow persisted? Or is there a deeper calculus at work, one where the survival of the individual is permanently, inextricably linked to the health of the whole? Could caring for the unrelated child actually strengthen the tribe so significantly that it benefits every single member, including the caregiver and their own kin? The answer may not lie in a single gene or a grand philosophical declaration, but in the dirt beneath our feet. The story of the orphan is inextricably linked to a revolution that changed everything. The moment we stopped wandering and began to belong to a place. The shift from a life of nomadic foraging to one of settled agriculture was more than a change in menu. It was a tectonic shift in the human psyche. We began to till the soil, to store grain, to build permanent homes that would outlast us. For the first time, there was something tangible to pass on. Not just stories and flint tools, but a specific plot of land, a stocked granary, a herd of animals. This concept of inheritance changed the meaning of family. Parenthood became not just about raising a child to adulthood, but about identifying an heir. A parent was now a guardian of wealth and a legacy, a link in a chain stretching into the future. In this new world of walls and fields and property, did the value of a child, any child, transform from a mere member of the tribe into a vital vessel for the future itself? The first stone was not a tool, but a boundary. The first seed was not just food, but a promise. When our ancestors finally stopped, when the relentless chase gave way to the patient vigil over a sown field, they did more than change their diet. They changed the very architecture of their lives. The world, once an endless expanse of tracks to follow, began to shrink into a map of known things. This river for water, that hill for sun, this specific patch of earth for the future. In this new, rooted existence, the family ceased to be merely a traveling band, a temporary shelter for raising the young. It transformed. It became the fundamental unit of something far more durable and consequential: power, legacy, and the quiet, desperate urge to cheat time itself by planting a name in the soil alongside the wheat. This deep shift from nomad to settler is written not in history books, but in our bones. The biology of belonging underwent a silent revolution. For the hunter-gatherer, wealth was ephemeral. The skill of a good throw, the knowledge of a berry patch, the strength to move to the next opportunity. It lived and died with the individual. But the earth is different. A field cleared, irrigated, and tended represents an investment of a lifetime. It cannot be carried, it must be guarded. This simple, physical reality forged a new, immense pressure, the pressure to protect and to pass on. Suddenly, genetic lineage was no longer a vague thread connecting generations. It was the legal document, the title deed to survival. Who would inherit this land, this stored grain, these domesticated animals? The answer tightened the family unit, pulling it inward, making the nuclear family, parents, and their direct offspring, the core of this new settled society. Property became inextricably linked to paternity, a biological contract written in the language of soil and seed. The drive to see one's own genes, one's own blood, benefit from this accumulated labor became a central organizing principle of life. Is our deepest urge to own the land, or to ensure a piece of us owns it long after we are gone? We can walk through the ghostly echoes of this transformation. The archaeological record of the Neolithic period is a story of stone and bone slowly settling into place. Where we once found temporary hearths and scattered campsites, we now find the foundations of permanent homes, their post holes driven deep into the earth like declarations of permanence. And perhaps more tellingly, we find the dead moving in with the living. Graves appear within the confines of homesteads, beneath the floors of dwellings. A body is no longer left on a platform to the sky. It is tucked into the very earth that sustained the family, a permanent resident of the plot they cultivated. This is more than ritual. It is a profound statement of continuity. It is the physical claim of the ancestors upon the land of their descendants, a silent, stony reinforcement of bloodline. These buried bones were the roots of a family tree, anchoring the living to a specific place, a specific past, and a specific future. What does it mean when the dead become a form of land title? The echoes of this ancient revolution resonate in the very foundations of our modern world. The concept of inheritance, the passing of land and wealth from one generation to the next, is so ingrained in our legal and social systems that it feels like a law of nature. Yet, it is a story that began with that first settled field. The family home, the heirloom, the family business, the estate, these are all modern manifestations of that primordial impulse to defend and bequeath. The family became, and for many still is, the original corporation, the first trust fund, the most intimate bank. It is a dual-purpose institution, safeguarding both genetic material and material wealth, one ensuring the propagation of the other. In this light, is the modern family less a haven of unconditional love and more a sophisticated, ancient system for managing capital, both biological and economic? But this neat, powerful system of lineage and legacy contains a silent, glaring paradox. It builds a wall around a plot of land and a bloodline. What of those who stand outside this wall? What of the individual who does not bear children, who does not produce direct heirs to inherit the earth? In a system so laser-focused on direct genetic transmission, do they become an evolutionary dead end, a forgotten branch on the family tree? If the core purpose of this new, settled family was the perpetuation of one's own genes through property, then the childless individual would seem to be a story without an ending, a field left fallow forever. Does a life without progeny truly vanish without a trace from the grand narrative of a bloodline? This apparent contradiction, however, leads us not to a flaw, but to a deeper, more subtle layer of human ingenuity. It reveals that the story of the family was never just a simple, linear tale of direct descent. The evolutionary calculus, it turns out, is far more clever, far more communal. The answer lies not in the individual, but in the weave of the wider clan. It lies in the quiet, powerful logic of shared genes and shared labor. When multiple generations began living together under the same permanent roof, grandparents, their children, their children's children, a natural and profound division of labor emerged. The elderly, their own hunting and gathering days waning, found a new critical purpose. They became the keepers of the hearth, the minders of the young, the repositories of knowledge and story. They freed the younger, stronger adults to range farther, to work the fields, to hunt, to defend, to produce the surplus that sustained the entire group. In doing so, an aunt, an uncle, a grandfather who never had children of their own were not evolutionary failures. They became vital cogs in the machine of their family's survival. By ensuring the well-being and success of their nieces, nephews, and grandchildren, individuals who carry a significant portion of their own genetic code, they were, in effect, ensuring the propagation of their own genes. They were investing in their genetic legacy indirectly, but no less powerfully. This is the elegant mechanism of inclusive fitness, where a gene can triumph by aiding the survival of those who share it. The family, therefore, evolved not just as a vehicle for direct reproduction, but as a cooperative for mutual genetic success. The work was shared, and in sharing the work, they shared the genetic reward. Could it be that the true inheritance we pass on is not held in a deed or a will, but in the time and care we give to those who carry a piece of us forward? In the dim, smoky light of a Stone Age hut, the rhythm of life was a shared endeavor. An elder, their face a map of time, watches over a toddler. Outside, the strong-limbed adults track the scent of prey. Adolescents linger at the periphery, their eyes absorbing the skills of the hunt, the art of the tool. Not every individual in this scene will bear children. Yet, each one, through their unique contribution, becomes a vital thread in the intricate tapestry of genetic continuity. The child's survival, and thus the future of the shared genes within the group, does not rest on a single pair of shoulders, but on the collective strength of the whole. This ancient tableau whispers a profound truth about our species. We are built not just for individual survival, but for the propagation of our lineage through a complex web of mutual care. Could it be that our deepest biological imperative is not merely to reproduce, but to ensure that our story, written in the code of our genes, continues in the world long after we are gone? This behavior, so elegantly simple in its appearance, finds a powerful explanation in the cold, precise language of biology. The theory of inclusive fitness, a cornerstone of modern evolutionary biology, proposes that an organism's genetic success is measured not only by its own direct offspring, but also by its ability to support the survival and reproduction of those who share its genes. Think of your genes as a recipe, a unique blueprint for building a human. You carry half of this recipe from each parent, meaning you share roughly half your genetic code with your siblings and your own children. You share a quarter with your nieces, nephews, and grandparents. This genetic overlap creates a powerful invisible calculus. By helping a relative survive and thrive, an individual is, in effect, helping copies of their own genes to persist into the next generation. The grandmother who gathers berries for her grandchildren, the aunt who protects her nieces from danger, the uncle who teaches his nephews to hunt. They are not merely being altruistic. They are engaging in a sophisticated strategy of genetic investment. Their contribution may not result in a child of their own, but it directly aids the survival of their genetic legacy. The selfless act of care, then, is perhaps the most selfishly logical act of all, from a gene's eye view of the world. But if our drive is so neatly selfish, why does this care so often feel like the most selfless thing we will ever do? The earth itself holds the evidence for this ancient pact of shared responsibility. Archaeological digs at prehistoric sites reveal settlements built for communal living, not isolated nuclear families. The bones tell stories, the remains of elderly individuals with severe arthritis, who could never have hunted or foraged enough to feed themselves, yet who lived to a ripe old age. They were fed, cared for, and valued. We find graves where children are buried with artifacts crafted by different hands, suggesting a community in mourning. The very layout of these ancient homes speaks to a life of interwoven fates, common hearths for shared meals, open spaces for collective learning, and storage pits that imply a pooling of resources. This was not a life of every person for themselves. It was a finely tuned system where roles were distributed according to ability and age. The strongest hunted, the most knowledgeable taught, the most patient nurtured. This division of labor was our first and most crucial technology, a social innovation that allowed our species to offset the immense vulnerability of our long, dependent childhoods. In the silent language of stones and bones, we see the blueprint for our success. What does it say about us that our greatest evolutionary advantage might not be a sharper claw, but a more helping hand? This ancient blueprint is not a relic. It is a living pattern that continues to shape the human experience, even in our hyper-modern, atomized world. The extended family network, though often stretched across continents, still functions as a vital support system. Grandparents provide childcare, allowing parents to work and ensuring the well-being of the next generation. Aunts and uncles become confidants and mentors, offering a different kind of love and guidance. Even more distant relatives can play a role, creating a broader clan identity that offers security and a sense of belonging. We see this in the cultural traditions that bring families together for holidays, celebrations, and times of crisis. We see it in the financial support, the shared wisdom, the collective memory that is passed down. This modern manifestation is inclusive fitness in action, now facilitated by digital screens and airplane tickets instead of a shared fire. The goal remains the same: to give the younger generation, the carriers of the family's genetic heritage, the best possible chance to flourish. The methods have changed, but the deep biological melody playing underneath our social interactions is hauntingly familiar. In a world that increasingly celebrates the individual, are we fighting against a fundamental part of our own nature by prioritizing the self over the clan? Yet, this neat biological narrative immediately encounters a beautiful and complicating truth. If the engine of our altruism is solely driven by the cold calculus of shared genes, why do we so readily care for those to whom we are not related? Why does a woman choose to adopt a child, pouring all her resources and love into a being who shares none of her DNA? Why do teachers, mentors, and community volunteers dedicate their lives to nurturing the next generation, often with no direct genetic benefit to themselves? This reality acts as a crack in the theory, a splash of vibrant, unpredictable color on a biological canvas that seemed almost complete. It suggests that the story is far more complex than simple genetic selfishness. The human heart seems capable of expanding its definition of kin beyond bloodlines, embracing others through bonds of love, shared experience, and conscious choice. This act seems to defy the very logic that explained our ancient cooperation. Is this modern altruism a glorious evolutionary mistake, or is it the next, more sophisticated expression of an ancient impulse? This paradox forces us to look closer, to refine our definitions and perhaps discover a deeper layer of understanding. It pushes us to consider that the roles we play in the grand drama of survival are not monolithic. We must distinguish between the biological mother, the one who contributes the egg and carries the child, and the social mother, the one who provides the care, nourishment, and protection that allows the child to thrive. In our deep past, these roles were almost always fulfilled by the same person, blurring the distinction. But human societies, in their incredible diversity, have long experimented with separating them. This is not an error in the system. It may be its greatest innovation. The presence of alloparents, individuals who are not the parents but who help raise the young, spreads the immense cost of child rearing across a wider group, increasing the chances of survival for everyone. A child with multiple social mothers has a larger safety net. The woman who cares for a child that is not her own may be strengthening the entire tribe, and a stronger tribe protects all its members, including her own genetic relatives. Her altruism circles back to benefit her. Could it be that we are wired to care, not just for our genetic kin, but for the entire community that ensures our shared survival? Perhaps the ultimate question, then, is not about whose genes are being saved, but what this intricate dance of giving and receiving reveals about the very essence of being human. Does the act of care itself, regardless of its target, become the true thread that weaves our humanity together, suggesting that our story was never about the individual gene, but about the collective soul? A newborn's cry pierces the quiet of a prehistoric night. It is not answered by the woman who gave it life, exhausted from a difficult birth, but by another. This other woman gathers the infant to her breast, offering the warmth of her body and the sustenance of her milk. She is not its genetic mother. She gains no direct evolutionary advantage from this act of profound generosity. In the stark calculus of survival and reproduction, this seems to be a costly, even irrational investment. And yet, this scene, repeated countless times across millennia, is not an anomaly. It is one of the foundational stones upon which humanity itself was built. Why would one life willingly pour its own resources into nurturing another, unrelated life? The answer whispers to us from our deepest past, suggesting that the story of humanity is not merely one of selfish genes, but of a collective cradle, woven from threads of milk and care that extend far beyond the confines of blood. The biological lens reveals a startling rarity in the animal kingdom. Humans are what scientists term cooperative breeders. In most primate societies, the mother bears the overwhelming burden of rearing her young. A female chimpanzee, for instance, is solely responsible for the 5-year marathon of carrying, nursing, protecting, and teaching her offspring. It is an exhausting, isolating endeavor that limits her ability to have more children. Humanity chose a different path. This strategy, cooperative breeding, is an evolutionary masterpiece of delegation. It allowed our early ancestors to overcome a brutal paradox. Human infants are born extraordinarily helpless, with massive, energy-hungry brains that require an extended period of development outside the womb. No single parent, not even a pair, could feasibly provide all the necessary calories and care. The solution was the village. By distributing the immense cost of raising a child across a network of caregivers, fathers, grandmothers, aunts, siblings, and unrelated group members, our species cracked the code. This freed mothers to have more children in closer succession, dramatically accelerating the growth and resilience of human communities. The act of that other woman nursing the child, therefore, is not a biological error. It is a sophisticated adaptation. It is the mechanism that allowed our brains to grow, our societies to complexify, and our species to vault ahead of our solitary parent cousins. But how do we know this village was ever more than a comforting theory? The proof is etched in bone, a silent testimony waiting in the earth for thousands of years. Bioarchaeologists, the detectives of dust, have learned to read these stories locked in the enamel of infant teeth. As teeth form, they incorporate elements from the food and drink consumed, creating microscopic layers not unlike the rings of a tree. By analyzing the stable isotopes in these layers, specifically variants of barium that pass from a mother's diet into her milk, researchers can reconstruct an individual's nursing history. The findings are profound. The teeth of our ancient ancestors tell a tale of shared motherhood. Isotopic signatures frequently show that infants were weaned onto supplemental foods much earlier than expected, or that the chemical composition of the milk they consumed shifted over time. This is the smoking gun. It suggests a child was not solely dependent on one woman's milk, but was nourished by multiple lactating women within the group. A mother might provide the primary sustenance, but when she was ill, or hunting, or simply exhausted, another's breast would offer solace. This was not a crisis intervention. It was the standard operating procedure. It was a communal insurance policy against the starvation of a child and the collapse of a family. This evidence shatters the simplistic notion of the nuclear family as an isolated biological unit. It paints a picture of a social organism where the boundaries of kinship were porous, where the phrase, "it takes a village," was not a sentimental cliché, but a literal, biological necessity for survival. The cradle of humanity was held by many hands. This ancient impulse did not vanish with the advent of agriculture or the rise of cities. It simply evolved its wardrobe. The social mother is a timeless archetype who walks among us still. She is the preschool teacher who patiently wipes away tears and celebrates the mastery of a crayon, shaping a mind that is not her own. She is the foster mother who opens her home and her heart to a child born of another's pain, offering a sanctuary of stability. She is the pediatric nurse who works through the night, her expertise a form of modern nurturing. She is the auntie, the chosen family, the close friend who steps in without question. These roles are the modern manifestations of that same cooperative breeding instinct. They demonstrate that the human definition of family has always been flexible, stretching beyond genetic allegiance to encompass a shared commitment to the next generation. We have institutionalized this ancient need, building schools, hospitals, and community centers that act as the village square, the collective hearth where social mothers and fathers gather. The network of care is now vast and complex, a global tapestry of connection, but its fundamental pattern remains unchanged. We are a species that thrives by sharing the weight of our future. Yet, this very expansion of the caring circle forces a difficult, almost heretical question. If our biology is so exquisitely tuned to nurture beyond our immediate gene pool, if our history is proof that family is a chosen network as much as a blood right, then why does the pull of blood remain so potent? Why do we still feel that primal, often unquestioned prioritization for those who share our DNA? The existence of the social mother does not erase the powerful instinct of the genetic mother. It exists, in a constant, dynamic tension with it. We live within this paradox, capable of breathtaking altruism toward strangers, and yet also capable of deep-seated nepotism and tribalism. This suggests that our evolutionary programming is not a simple on-off switch for kindness, but a complex dashboard of conflicting impulses. We are built to expand our circle of care, but are we also hardwired to always keep one circle, the innermost one, reserved for our own? To answer that, we must turn the biological coin over. For the same evolutionary forces that crafted our profound capacity for cooperation and nurture within the group also forged a terrifying counterpart for dealing with those outside of it. The cradle, it seems, was built by the same hands that could wield a club. The profound sense of kinship, the willingness to sacrifice for one's own, is the flip side of a deep-seated wariness, even aggression, toward the other. The village that collectively nourishes its young is also the tribe that mobilizes to defend its resources. This is the grand, unsettling paradox of human nature. Our ability to love widely may be inextricably linked to our capacity to hate narrowly. The same impulse that leads a woman to nurse another's child is fueled by a drive to ensure her group, her culture, her people prevail. So, where does this leave us? If the story of the social mother reveals our magnificent potential for connection beyond self-interest, does the shadow of the tribe reveal an inescapable limit? Can we ever truly expand the circle of us to include all of humanity? Or are we forever bound by the ancient brutal logic that to fiercely love one's own necessitates a readiness to defend against the other? Is the warmth of the cradle forever haunted by the chill of the club? We are quick to forgive the faults of a brother, yet so ready to raise a hand against a stranger. Is the family, then, both a sheltering embrace and a fortress wall against the world beyond? This intimate circle, the first society we ever know, teaches us the language of love and the unspoken rules of war. It is our cradle of compassion and our first school for conflict. Within its bounds, loyalty flows as naturally as blood. Beyond its perimeter, suspicion grows like a weed. This paradox is not a flaw in our design, but perhaps the very engine of our history. Could it be that the same force that binds us so tightly to our own is the very one that blinds us to the humanity of the other? The blueprint for this duality might be written in the most ancient parts of ourselves, in the silent, relentless logic of our genes. Evolutionary biologists point to a principle known as kin selection. It is a simple, cold, and breathtakingly efficient equation. A gene that promotes behavior which aids the survival of those who share it will, by extension, ensure its own propagation. This is not a matter of conscious calculation, but of deep, primal impulse. We feel a pull to protect, to provide, to sacrifice for our family, because, in a biological sense, they are us. They are the vessels carrying our genetic legacy into the uncertain future. This instinct is the foundation of our deepest loves and our most profound sense of duty. Yet every action creates an equal and opposite reaction. This fierce, inward-looking loyalty carves the world into a stark landscape of us and them. If my genes are invested in your survival, then your genes, stranger, are a competitor for resources, for safety, for space. The same mechanism that builds the cradle forges the club. The warmth we feel within the circle is generated by the coldness we project beyond its edge. Is our capacity for love, then, inherently linked to our capacity for exclusion? Long before written history could record our contradictions, the earth itself was keeping score. The silent testimony of bones and stones tells a story that echoes this genetic whisper. Archaeologists unearthing the remains of prehistoric societies often find evidence of lives lived in remarkable internal harmony. There are signs of care for the sick and the elderly, of shared meals and communal labor. A single grave might hold the skeletons of a group, resting together in a peace that seems to have lasted a lifetime. But travel just a few valleys over, and the story written in the soil changes to one of brutal finality. Another grave is found, this one a mass burial. The skeletons within bear the unmistakable marks of violent death, skulls fractured by identical club designs, arrowheads embedded in bone. These were not random acts of violence, but organized group-against-group conflicts. The family, the tribe, had become the boundary line between peace and war. The very unit that provided safety and meaning to its members became the banner under which they marched against their neighbors. The hearth fire that warmed one group cast long, threatening shadows onto the next. Did these early humans, standing guard at the edge of their camp, feel fear or hatred, or simply the unshakable conviction that those outside the circle were a threat to everything warm and good inside it? This ancient dance between the intimate us and the foreign them did not fade with the advent of civilization. It simply learned new steps and found new costumes. The scale has expanded, but the underlying rhythm remains hauntingly familiar. In our modern world, the family dinner table can be a theater where this drama plays out in microcosm. Stories are shared, alliances formed, and a subtle unspoken boundary is reinforced between those who belong at the table and those who do not. We teach our children to be kind, to share, to be good, lessons that almost always apply primarily to those within our immediate circle. This pattern replicates itself, fractal-like, throughout our societies. In politics, patriotism can curdle into jingoism, where love of country is defined not by shared values, but by opposition to a foreign other. In sports, the tribal paint and chants of fans are a perfectly sanctioned simulation of ancient group loyalties and rivalries, where the victory of our team is a visceral thrill and their loss a genuine sorrow. The same human heart that donates to a local charity might harbor a quiet suspicion of immigrants. The family, in its myriad extended forms, remains the fundamental building block of human allegiance, and with that allegiance comes the ever-present shadow of its dark twin, the potential for violence against the outsider. Has modern life simply given us more sophisticated tools to draw the same old lines? But what if this link between blood and loyalty is not an unbreakable chain? What if our biology, which seems to bind us so tightly to our kin, is not the final word on who we can care for? This is the quiet rebellion at the heart of the human story, the possibility of stretching the definition of family beyond the limits of genetics. If our innate tendency is to circle the wagons, then the entirety of human history can also be read as a slow, painful, and often unsuccessful effort to move those wagons into a wider, more inclusive circle. We see glimmers of this everywhere. In the soldier who falls on a grenade for comrades who are not his brothers, in the stranger who risks everything to save another during a disaster, in the global movement of aid that flows toward victims of a faraway earthquake. These acts defy the simple calculus of kin selection. They suggest a different kind of inheritance, one not of blood, but of idea, of choice, of spirit. Can we consciously choose to see the stranger not as a threat, but as a potential member of a new, much larger tribe? Is the feeling of belonging something we can manufacture? The answer to that question leads us to humanity's most crucial and dangerous invention. For we discovered that the bonds of blood, for all their primal power, are too limited to build a civilization upon. So we learned to simulate them. We learned to craft stories so compelling, to design symbols so potent, that they could trick the ancient, tribal parts of our brain into feeling the same fierce loyalty for a non-relative as we would for our own child. We invented the idea of the tribe, the nation, the creed, communities bound not by DNA, but by shared myth, shared identity, and shared purpose. We began to speak of brothers in arms and founding fathers, of motherlands and blood oaths that involve no actual blood. We created flags to rally around and anthems to sing together, forging an artificial kinship on a scale biology could never achieve. This was our great evolutionary leap, not just to be driven by instinct, but to consciously harness and redirect it. We built larger shelters, but we also drew larger perimeter walls. For if we can simulate kinship to create breathtaking acts of cooperation and charity, can we not also simulate the other to justify breathtaking acts of violence? We speak of brothers in arms, of our work family, of nations as motherlands or fatherlands. We borrow the intimate language of blood and kinship to build the vast, abstract structures of our societies. It raises a quiet, persistent question. Is the family merely a primordial blueprint? A biological template that culture has endlessly copied and scaled up to forge loyalty on a grander scale? Perhaps our deepest social architectures are not inventions at all, but rather clever, poignant extrapolations of the first and most fundamental bond we ever know. The human brain, a marvel of evolution, is wired for connection. Deep within its ancient layers lies a powerful imperative: protect your own. This initial circle of own is small, defined by the immediate and the visceral, the scent of a child, the shared features of a parent, the familiar touch of a sibling. This is the dominion of kin selection, a biological rule where genes selfishly promote their own propagation by favoring those who carry them. Loyalty, in its most primal form, is a matter of blood. It is an unspoken vow etched into our very neurons, a preference for the familiar face that promises the survival of our genetic legacy. Yet, the human story did not end there. Our burgeoning cultures, our growing tribes demanded more. We learned to simulate. We discovered that the powerful emotions binding a family, the fierce protectiveness, the unconditional trust, the shared grief, could be artificially triggered, harnessed to glue together groups far larger than any single lineage. We began to see the tribe, the clan, the band, not as a collection of strangers, but as an extended family. We called each other brother and sister, aunt and uncle, weaving a web of fictive kinship that leveraged our oldest biological instincts for brand new social purposes. The circle of us expanded, not by denying our nature, but by creatively exploiting its deepest grooves. The heart's compass was recalibrated to navigate a much wider world. This strategic borrowing of familial bonds is etched not just in our genes, but in the dust of ancient ruins. Long before modern nations, rulers understood the potent symbolism of the parent. Pharaohs of Egypt were living gods, but also the father and mother of the people, responsible for the nourishment and protection of their immense, sprawling household. In Rome, the emperor was Pater Patriae, the father of the fatherland, a title that merged political authority with the moral obligations of a patriarch. His power was absolute, but it was framed not merely as domination, but as paternal care. On the battlefields of countless civilizations, warriors did not fight for a flag or a concept of statehood. They fought for the man beside them, the brother they broke bread with, the one who shared their tent. They were a band of brothers, their loyalty forged in the shared experience of hardship, mirroring the shared upbringing of siblings. This was more than metaphor. It was a psychological technology. By using the language of the family, leaders could tap into a wellspring of loyalty far deeper and more visceral than any demand based on mere law or duty could ever achieve. They were building a nation one imagined kinship at a time. The state became a family, and citizenship became a form of kinship. This ancient practice did not fade with the advent of the modern world. It refined itself. Today, the hum of the corporate office is a far cry from the ancient battlefield, yet the same primordial chords are struck. Companies speak of their corporate family, urging loyalty and sacrifice for the collective good. Team-building exercises are designed to foster brotherly bonds. Nationalism, in its many forms, remains one of the most powerful forces on Earth, and it still draws its emotional power from this same source. We sing hymns to the motherland. We speak of fatherland security. We venerate founding fathers. Our rituals, from national anthems that stir a collective pride to military boot camps that break down individual identity to rebuild it as part of a unit, all meticulously exploit this evolutionary heritage. They are clever cultural tricks that convince our Stone Age brains to care passionately about millions of people we will never meet. The loyalty we feel for our flag, for our team, for our company, is a ghost of the loyalty we are programmed to feel for our kin. It is a magnificent and perhaps terrifying testament to our ability to project the intimate onto the immense. But this clever simulation comes at a cost. When the bonds of politics and the bonds of blood become entangled, what happens when true, biological kinship demands one thing, and the simulated family of the state demands another? The system reveals its fault lines. The extended family of the nation asks its sons and daughters to go to war, to kill and die for their brothers and sisters in arms. Yet, back home, a real mother loses a real son. A real sister loses a real brother. The profound, authentic grief of a biological family is the ultimate price paid for the abstract loyalty of the political one. The language of family is used to send young men to their deaths, and the same language is used to mourn them. Is there a point where the metaphor breaks under the weight of such real, tangible loss? Can the pain of a mother who has lost her child ever truly be encompassed by the phrase, "a loss for the nation"? The abstraction of the collective family crashes against the unassailable reality of individual love. This collision is the stuff of legend and history, a recurring nightmare where a personal loss ignites a collective inferno. The stories are universal. A king is murdered, and his death is not just the loss of a ruler, but the loss of a father to the people. His son, the prince, is now a son bereft. His personal, all-consuming grief, a raw, biological response to the loss of a parent, merges seamlessly with his political duty to avenge the fatherland. The intimate cry for vengeance becomes a national rallying cry. The death of a parent becomes the cause for war. The emotional engine of the smallest possible unit, the family, is used to power the vast, destructive machinery of the state. The personal is not just political, it is militarized. This transmutation raises a disturbing possibility. Are our largest and most devastating conflicts often just personal tragedies scaled to a catastrophic level? Is history, in part, a story of the raw, unmediated grief of individuals being harnessed to mobilize armies? We built our vast communities using the model of the family, but in doing so, did we also build a conduit for its most destructive emotions to flood the world? If a single death can unravel the peace of nations, what does that say about the foundation upon which we've built everything? In the great myths of our world, from the epics of ancient Greece to the chronicles of China, a single recurring spark ignites the conflagration of war. It is not always a stolen treasure or a desecrated temple that first sets the armies marching. Often it is a far more intimate catastrophe, the death of a father, a king, a beloved leader. A profound personal grief, a tear in the very fabric of a family or a tribe, somehow metastasizes into a collective rage that can consume continents. Why does this most private of tragedies so frequently become the public engine of our most terrible conflicts? What alchemy transforms a heart's breaking into a nation's call to arms? The answer may begin not in the halls of power, but in the silent, ancient wiring of our own bodies. The searing pain of losing a parent, a child, a kin. This is more than just sadness. It is a biological alarm, a primal siren screaming in the deep. Our brains, these intricate organs forged over eons of survival, do not process such a loss as mere misfortune. They register it as a direct and existential threat. This person was a vessel for shared genes, a cornerstone in the structure of our own continued existence. Their sudden absence creates a void that feels like a physical danger, triggering a cascade of hormones designed for one purpose: to fight or to flee. The grief is a weight, but the anger is a weapon. It is a raw, neurological response to a world suddenly made unstable and hostile. Could it be that the very love that binds us so tightly also primes us, at our most vulnerable, for a violence we never knew we possessed? Is the impulse to mourn and the impulse to destroy born from the same dark wellspring? This biological spark finds its tinder in the dry kindling of social structure. Archaeology offers us silent stone testimony to this pattern, written in broken bones and mass graves. We unearth sites where a community was shattered not by a slow decline, but by a sudden, catastrophic violence that seems to coincide with the void left by a lost leader. A chieftain falls, and his burial mound becomes not just a place of mourning, but a rallying point, a stark reminder of a power vacuum that must be filled, often with the blood of rivals. The funeral rites themselves transform. The wailing and the feasting are not merely acts of remembrance, they are a theater of politics. Who stands closest to the pyre? Who gives the eulogy? Who receives the most sacred relics? In the shadow of death, the dance of succession begins, and its steps are often brutal. The collective grief becomes a potent glue, binding followers together against a perceived common enemy, real or imagined. The memory of the fallen is no longer a quiet, personal thing. It is a banner, a standard to be held aloft as the charge begins. Is a society, in its most fragile moment, inevitably destined to seek strength in the clarity of an external conflict? This ancient script, it seems, is one we have never stopped performing. In our modern world, with its digital networks and nation-states, the same old story plays out on a grander, more devastating scale. The assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo becomes the match that lights the powder keg of a world war, a single death in a single family, magnified by alliances and anxieties into a global catastrophe. A charismatic political leader is martyred, and their death becomes the foundational myth for a movement, a reason to take up arms for generations. We see it in corporate boardrooms after the sudden departure of a CEO, in street gangs avenging a fallen member, in the sectarian violence that follows the death of a religious figure. The language used is always telling. It is the language of family. They killed our father. We must protect our brothers and sisters. The intimate loss is polished into a political tool, a perfectly relatable reason to ask young men and women to trade their lives for a cause. The personal is not just political, it is so often militarized. Does our need to make sense of a random, painful death inevitably lead us to weave a narrative of blame, one that demands the ultimate price from others? Yet, this forces an uncomfortable, almost heretical question. We are taught that the family is our first and greatest sanctuary, the cradle of civilization, a bulwark against the chaos of the world. But if this same institution, through the raw wound of a loss, can so easily become the very genesis of that chaos, can we still see it as a purely safe harbor? Is the potential for both creation and destruction, for boundless love and limitless vengeance, woven into its very definition? The family giveth, and the family, in its breaking, taketh away on a colossal scale. Perhaps the darkest reflection of this paradox is found not in the grand wars fought over a father's death, but in the brutal, ancient practice that often followed and perpetuated such conflicts. For in the smoldering aftermath of battle, the victors would often claim their most symbolic prize. They would not just take land or gold, they would take the family itself. Archaeological evidence from Neolithic sites reveals a grim pattern. The bones of men and boys often show signs of mass violence, while the remains of women and young children from a different genetic line appear suddenly integrated into the conquering tribe. They were taken. The family, the very thing one went to war to avenge, becomes the ultimate spoil of war. A living, breathing resource to be captured, assimilated, and owned. The cry of "they took our father" is answered with the act of taking theirs, creating a new cycle of grievance that will one demand its own retaliation. So where does this leave us? If the family is both the cherished thing we destroy worlds to protect and the coveted thing we destroy worlds to acquire, can we ever truly untangle the knot of love, loss, and violence that defines so much of human history? Is the desire to have a home, to belong to a clan, the very same force that compels us to burn the homes of others? The earth holds its memories in bone and stone, not in ink. Scattered across the plains of time, from the river valleys of Europe to the ancient shores of the Americas, archaeological sites whisper a chilling, consistent story. We find the remains of small groups, often women and children, whose bones tell a tale not of quiet passing, but of violent ends. They are found far from the genetic kin of their birth, captives in a foreign land. This is not the simple spoils of war as we might imagine it. It is something more primal, a foundational tremor in the human story. It suggests that the very first families, the original units of human connection, may not have always been forged in the safety of a hearth, but perhaps just as often in the violent, desperate act of theft. The family, our sanctuary, might have also been, from its very inception, something that could be taken. Imagine the scene, not as a dry fact in a textbook, but as a slow, grim documentary unfolding. The sun struggles to break through a haze of smoke and dawn mist. The quiet of a small settlement is shattered by shouts, the thud of clubs, the raw terror of a surprise attack. The conflict is swift and brutal. When the noise subsides, the victors do not just take food or tools. They seize people. A young woman is dragged away, her fate now tied to the men who have just killed her brothers. A child, confused and crying, is scooped up and carried off into the unknown. In that moment, she ceases to be a person and becomes property, a living resource. This is not mere cruelty for its own sake. It is, at its cold, biological core, a terrifyingly efficient evolutionary strategy. Why spend years raising a child to adulthood when you can steal one? Why court a mate within your own small gene pool when you can capture new genetic material from outside, diversifying and strengthening your own lineage? In the brutal arithmetic of survival and reproduction, the captured woman and the adopted child represent a direct and immediate dividend. Their potential futures are harvested, their reproductive capacity annexed to serve the evolutionary success of the captors. The drive to pass on one's genes, the most fundamental imperative of life, here expresses itself not through courtship, but through conquest. The family becomes a prize, a living treasure trove of genetic opportunity wrested from the hands of rivals. The evidence for this is etched into the very skeletons of our ancestors, silent witnesses to a past drenched in conflict. At a site like Talheim in Germany, a mass grave from the Neolithic period reveals a community executed by blunt force trauma, likely from stone axes. Notably, the men of the group were killed, but many of the women are missing. Where did they go? The most plausible answer is abduction. Similarly, other excavations reveal villages where the remains of women show genetic markers distinct from the men they were buried alongside, suggesting they originated from faraway groups. Their presence in the community was not born of migration or peaceful exchange, but of force. These are not isolated incidents, but a pattern, a recurring motif in the story of early humanity. The archaeological record, therefore, does not just show us death. It shows us a specific kind of selective violence. It paints a picture where intergroup conflict was not a simple battle for territory, but a calculated raid for the most valuable resource of all: people. The victors did not just want to eliminate competition. They wanted to acquire its biological capital. The family unit of the vanquished was dismantled, its most vital components integrated into the fabric of the conqueror's tribe. This was the original, brutal supply chain for building a society. And perhaps most unsettling of all is the realization that this ancient blueprint of violence and acquisition has not been consigned to the distant past. It has merely evolved, putting on new clothes to walk through modern streets. The forced marriages that still plague many parts of the world, where young women are treated as currency to settle debts or forge alliances, are a direct echo of those prehistoric raids. The global scourge of human trafficking, which preys disproportionately on women and children, reducing them to commodities to be bought and sold, is the same old predatory instinct operating within a globalized economy. Even in the chaos of modern warfare, we see the same horrific pattern emerge. Sexual violence is used as a weapon of war, and children are kidnapped to be soldiers or slaves. The technology has changed. The justifications have been dressed in political or economic language, but the underlying animal impulse remains eerily familiar. The desire to claim, to own, to control the reproductive and productive power of another human being, to see a person as an asset, is a thread that runs unbroken from the Stone Age burial pit to the dark web's digital marketplaces. Has our morality truly progressed, or have we simply refined the methods of our ancient savagery? This dark portrait of humanity, painted in the stark colors of biological imperative and archaeological evidence, leads us to a profound and paradoxical question. If our evolutionary history is indeed so steeped in this brutal calculus of stealing families, then why do we also possess the opposite impulse in such overwhelming measure? Why does a father instinctively throw himself in front of a car to push his child to safety? Why does a mother starve so her son can eat? Why do we, across cultures and epochs, celebrate the ultimate sacrifice made for kin? This is the central contradiction of the human heart. We are a species that built its world on the twin pillars of brutal acquisition and profound, selfless love. The same man who might have once raised a club to steal a woman from a neighboring tribe would, without a moment's hesitation, lay down his life to protect the daughter born from that very union. This is not a flaw in the narrative. It is the narrative itself. The capacity for ruthless violence to protect and acquire one's own, and the capacity for breathtaking sacrifice for those same people, are two sides of the same evolutionary coin. One cannot exist without the other. The very same genetic selfishness that drove us to steal also drove us to love with a ferocity that can override the most powerful instinct of all, the will to survive. So where does this leave us? Suspended between our darkest and most luminous potentials. The answer to this paradox, the key that unlocks the mystery of our selfless love, might lie hidden within the very code that also compels our violence. It is written in a language of shared genes and evolutionary mathematics, in a brilliant strategy known not for its brutality, but for its breathtaking generosity. It is the ancient, invisible force that makes a home a sanctuary and kin our keepers. It is the selfish gene's most selfless trick. What if the deepest love we can feel is, in the final calculation, merely a different kind of survival? A parent runs into a burning building. A soldier throws themselves on a grenade. We watch these acts, breath held in awe and horror, and a single silent question echoes in the stillness that follows. Why? Why would a conscious being, with a singular, precious life to live, choose to extinguish its own flame for the sake of another's? The answer, it seems, might be written not in the stars, but in the very code that writes us. It is a whisper in our blood, a story told in the double helix, a narrative of survival where the hero sometimes dies. This is the story of the selfish gene that, paradoxically, demands selflessness. The biological lens offers a stark, clean, and almost chillingly logical answer. It speaks of kin selection and inclusive fitness, terms that sound cold, but describe a furnace of devotion. The central idea is that we are, in a profound sense, not merely individuals, but temporary vessels for ancient genetic material. Our bodies are libraries carrying a specific collection of books, and our closest relatives carry many of the same volumes. From this perspective, an act of supreme sacrifice is not a loss for the genetic library, but a strategic trade. A gene that programs a body to die saving 3 siblings, who each carry a copy of that same gene, has not perished. It has, in fact, multiplied its chances. It has traded one copy for three, ensuring its own continued existence in the world. This is the mathematics of love written in the language of evolution. It is why the cry of a child triggers a physiological earthquake in a parent, a surge of cortisol and adrenaline that overrides all sense of self-preservation. It explains the fierce protective loyalty between siblings who shared a cradle. Our deepest, most heartfelt instincts to protect our family might be, at their core, a brilliant and ruthless genetic strategy. The self dies so that the self's blueprint may live on in others. Is love, then, simply a beautiful word we invented for a brutal calculation of genetic arithmetic? If this theory is merely a modern abstraction, where can we look for its fingerprints in the dust of time? The answer lies in the quiet, bony narratives of the long dead. Archaeology provides the stage where this genetic play was first performed. In ancient graves, we find not just the stories of mighty hunters and leaders, but tender, quieter testaments to this ingrained altruism. We find skeletons withered by age or crippled by disease that show signs of having lived long past their ability to contribute. A healed femur fracture, a jaw worn down by years of being fed softened food, the bones of an elder carefully arranged in a fetal curl. These are not just remains. They are monuments to care. They are proof that our ancestors, struggling for mere survival in a brutal world, chose again and again to expend precious calories, to offer protection and time, to carry the weak when slowing down could mean death for the whole group. This was not an economic decision. It was a familial one. The group's strength was in its bonds, and those bonds were woven from the shared threads of common blood. The survival of the gene pool demanded that every possible copy be cherished. Does the profound dignity found in caring for the helpless, an act we consider a pinnacle of human virtue, find its origin in the simple, unsentimental economics of genetic preservation? This ancient, hardwired impulse did not vanish with the advent of modernity. It simply put on new clothes. It became codified, ritualized, and sanctified. The raw biological drive transformed into the bedrock of our social and moral codes. The parent working double shifts under fluorescent lights to pay for a child's education is enacting the same sacrificial script as the prehistoric mother sharing her meager meal. The sibling who co-signs a loan, who offers a spare room, who provides unwavering emotional support, is playing a part written by eons of evolution. We call it duty, we call it love, we call it family. These are the noble banners we fly, but the army beneath them may march to a much older, more primal drumbeat. Our entire social structure, from the nuclear family outward, can be seen as a magnificent, sprawling monument to genetically programmed altruism. We have built cathedrals of meaning upon a foundation of reproductive strategy. So when we feel that surge of unconditional love for our kin, are we experiencing a transcendent human emotion? Or are we hearing the faint, powerful echo of a gene's imperative to survive? Yet, the heart rebels against this reduction. It feels too sterile, too incomplete. Can the breathtaking complexity of human love, with all its tenderness, frustration, joy, and sacrifice, truly be whittled down to a mere genetic subroutine? Perhaps the story is not one of replacement, but of layering. The gene provides the foundational clay, the basic powerful impulse to protect those who share our blood. But upon that foundation, humanity has constructed something far more complex: culture, emotion, and conscious choice. Marriage and family are not just genetic strategies. They are social contracts, economic partnerships, and crucibles for profound emotional connection. They are a genetic contract, yes, but one that is felt as poetry, not read as a legal document. We cooperate not only to propagate genes, but to build a shared world of meaning, to ward off the existential chill of solitude, to create a legacy that is more than just biological. The gene might light the fuse, but culture, psychology, and spirit build the rocket. This intertwining of the biological and the social leads us to a deeper, more intricate question about the most fundamental of human alliances. If family is the cradle of this evolved altruism, then what is the nature of the partnership that often creates it? Is the union of marriage a grand, emotional epic, or is it too a sophisticated piece of evolutionary engineering? We often speak of marriage as a story of the heart, a narrative written in the language of poetry and promises. It is the grand, shared dream of two souls finding their perfect counterpart. But what if we were to shift the lens, to pull back the focus from the intimate glow of the hearth to the vast, star-charted map of deep time? From this vantage point, the institution of marriage begins to look less like a romantic sonnet and more like a meticulously crafted genetic strategy refined over millions of years of trial and error. It is a biological imperative dressed in the finery of culture, a dance of DNA masquerading as a dance of desire. Consider the raw biological substrate of this union. Long before a diamond ring or a wedding vow ever existed, our ancestors were making choices. They were not conscious choices, not in the way we understand them, but impulses guided by an ancient and unspoken calculus. A potential mate's strength, their vitality, the symmetry of their features. These were not merely aesthetic preferences. They were crude, effective proxies for health, for robust genes, for a higher probability of survival. This is the engine of sexual selection, a force as powerful as natural selection itself. It is the reason the peacock grows his cumbersome, magnificent tail. It is the reason our ancestors might have favored a partner who could hunt, or gather, or simply display the unmistakable glow of fertility. The goal was never mere companionship. The unconscious driving purpose was to weave the strongest possible genetic thread into the fabric of the next generation. The heart, it seems, has always been a shrewd, if secret, geneticist. This biological impulse did not remain in the primordial ooze. It found expression and was in turn shaped by the rise of human culture. As we began to bury our dead and paint on cave walls, we also began to formalize these pairings. Archaeology reveals a story far removed from our ideal of love. In the dust of ancient settlements and the fragments of clay tablets, we find marriage as a contract. It was a treaty between tribes, a transfer of wealth between families, a bulwark to secure a bloodline. A king married a princess not for her wit, but to seal an alliance and prevent a war. A farmer offered his daughter to another family, along with a dowry of grain and livestock, to consolidate land and resources. The individual desires of the bride and groom were often the smallest consideration in a much larger social equation. Here, the genetic strategy became a collective one. It was no longer just about the survival of one's own offspring, but about strengthening the entire clan, the tribe, the kingdom, the larger vessel that carried your genes into the future. The personal was, irrevocably, political. And what of our modern world, with its dating apps and self-proclaimed romantic autonomy? Have we truly escaped this ancient programming? The language has changed, but the underlying currents feel strangely familiar. We may not barter with livestock, but we unconsciously assess a potential partner's career prospects, their educational background, their social standing, modern proxies for resource acquisition and stability. The algorithms on our screens perform a digital version of an age-old screening process, sorting by height, income, and shared interests, creating a marketplace of mates that would be eerily recognizable to our trading ancestors. Even the most love-struck couple who believe their union is a unique rebellion against all convention are often enacting a script written by deep time. They are choosing a co-parent, a protector, a partner in the most fundamental project of all, propelling life forward. Our emotions, our dizzying feelings of love and attachment may be the beautiful, compelling interface for a program that is far older and more pragmatic than we dare admit. This leads us to a quiet, unsettling contradiction. If marriage is, at its core, a sophisticated strategy for genetic propagation, a coldly efficient vehicle for our DNA, then why does its central product, the child, so often seem to be the very agent of its undoing? Children are the point of the entire endeavor, and yet they are also profoundly disruptive. They strain the romantic bond that created them, draining time, energy, and resources. They amplify stresses and expose fissures in the relationship. They transform a partnership of two into a complicated network of competing needs. The very entity that the genetic strategy is designed to produce appears to be a primary threat to the stable environment required to raise it. So, why do it? Why would a perfectly good genetic strategy honed over millennia include a feature that seems so counterproductive, so inherently risky? The answer to this paradox may lie not in the grand design of the strategy itself, but in the nature of the passengers it carries. This flaw in the design, this apparent miscalculation, points us toward a more profound and surprising truth. It suggests that the architects of this entire system are not the wise, far-seeing entities we might imagine. They are instead profoundly selfish and short-sighted. They are concerned only with their own replication, with their own journey into the next generation, even if it means burdening the vessel that carries them. The stability of the relationship, the happiness of the individuals, these are secondary concerns, mere collateral in a much older, much more relentless game. The strategy of marriage, for all its cultural complexity and emotional depth, might ultimately be a tool for the lazy genes. The infant's cry pierces the quiet of the night, a sound so primal it seems to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in the bones. It is a demand, raw and unreasoning. For the exhausted parents stumbling from their bed, it is a call to arms in a war against their own need for sleep. In that moment, it feels like a design flaw, a terrible inefficiency in the system of human life. Why this relentless need? This constant, draining requirement for attention? We see it as a problem to be solved, a phase to be endured. But what if we have it backwards? What if this isn't a flaw in the blueprint, but its most ingenious feature? This nightly negotiation, this economy of tears and comfort, is one of biology's oldest stories. It is not a breakdown of order, but order itself, a brutal, beautiful strategy encoded deep within us. The child's helplessness is its ultimate power. Its cries are not random noise. They are a precise instrument of survival, a form of parental manipulation. In the cold calculus of evolution, a gene that promotes behaviors ensuring its own passage to the next generation is a successful gene. And what could be more effective than a gene that compels the caregiver to care, to give more food, more warmth, more protection, long after the womb has released its hold? The child, through its sheer neediness, forces a greater investment of resources. It hijacks the parental brain, triggering cascades of hormones like cortisol for alertness and oxytocin for bonding, ensuring that its demands are not just heard, but felt on a visceral level. The parent is biologically wired to respond, to alleviate the distress, and in doing so, they secure the survival of their own genetic legacy. The child, in its glorious laziness, outsources its every need, and the world obliges. So, is love just a sophisticated term for a biological transaction? We can find echoes of this ancient contract etched in the most fragile of remains, the bones of children who lived and died tens of thousands of years ago. Archaeology tells a story not of brute strength, but of profound vulnerability and the care that answered it. The skeletons of Neanderthal children show signs of debilitating injuries and chronic conditions that would have been swiftly fatal without years of sustained support. They were carried, fed by hand, and protected long before they could ever contribute to the group. This was not an efficient allocation of calories in a world of scarcity. It was a monumental investment in the future. This laziness, this extended period of dependence, was not a weakness that we overcame. It was the very crucible in which our humanity was forged. It demanded cooperation. It demanded communication. It demanded empathy. It forced adults to plan, to share, to understand the needs of another who could not articulate them in words. The family unit, the band, the tribe, these were not just social inventions. They were biological necessities built around the demanding, lazy infant. Could it be that our capacity for culture and compassion was born not in the hunt, but in the nursery? This dynamic, born in the dust of prehistory, plays out now under the electric glow of a baby monitor. Modern parents are just as susceptible to the ancient call. The exhaustion is the same, even if the surroundings are softer. The midnight feedings, the inexplicable tears, the constant vigilance. It is a drain on time, energy, and spirit. Yet, it is within this very exhaustion that the deepest bonds are welded. The sleepless nights become a shared trial. The constant demands create a rhythm of response and connection that forms an unbreakable tether. The troublesome nature of the child is the friction that generates the heat of attachment. In a world that often prizes independence and self-sufficiency, the child's relentless dependence is the anchor that holds the family ship fast against the currents of distraction and disconnection. We are bound not in spite of the struggle, but because of it. So does the strength of a family lie in its ease or in the cost of its upkeep? This leads us to a quieter, more disquieting thought. If the child's manipulation is a biological imperative and the parent's response is equally rooted in deep-seated genetic programming, then where does that leave our sense of self, our belief in free will within the most intimate of our relationships? How much of the love we feel for our children is a genuine emotional connection, and how much is the magnificent, invisible hand of evolution guiding us, ensuring we perform the duties required for the survival of the species? Are we the authors of our care, or merely elegant vessels for genes that demand to be replicated? The warmth of a mother's embrace, the protective fury of a father, are these noble emotions, or just highly effective algorithms written in the language of DNA? The line between a conscious choice and a preordained response begins to blur, leaving us to wonder if the heart has its own reasons, or if it simply follows a script written a million years ago. To untangle this knot, we must look closer, beyond the behavior itself, and into the very code that instructs it. We must journey from the warm, crying chaos of the nursery down into the cool, silent library of the cell. From the grand theater of family life to the microscopic stage where the players, the genes, reside. What happens when we trace the thread of a single cry, not back to a feeling, but to a sequence of molecules? We often think of our genes as a kind of biological blueprint, a fixed set of instructions that dictates the color of our eyes or the shape of our nose. They are the architects of our physical form, the silent librarians of our corporeal existence. But what if these tiny coiled strands of code reach far deeper, whispering not just into the mirror, but into the very heart of our most intimate moments? What if they have a quiet, persistent voice in how we love within the walls of our homes, how we flare in anger at a loved one's words, or how we find the strength against all odds to forgive? The story of the family, it seems, is not written solely by culture or circumstance. It is also etched in part in a language billions of years old, a narrative that begins with a single molecule. This narrative unfolds in the chemistry of connection. Deep within the brain, a delicate dance of neurotransmitters and hormones orchestrates the symphony of human bonding. Oxytocin, often simplistically dubbed the love hormone, is far more than a chemical cliché. It is the quiet architect of trust, the biological mortar in the foundation of an infant's bond with its mother. Its release during childbirth, during breastfeeding, during a simple warm embrace, forges an invisible tether. It whispers a message of safety, of belonging. Alongside it, dopamine, the molecule of anticipation and reward, paints positive associations onto our relationships. The joy of a parent's returning smile, the comfort of a familiar voice. These moments are underlined and highlighted by our own internal chemistry, encouraging us to seek more, to build upon these connections. These are not just fleeting feelings. They are biological imperatives, written into our code to ensure we stick together, that we care for our vulnerable young, that we form the tribes that ensured our survival. Is the warmth we feel holding a child merely emotion? Or is it also, in some profound way, an ancient genetic recipe being followed? To understand the weight of this genetic inheritance, we must journey back, far beyond written history, to the faint echoes of our earliest ancestors. Imagine a small band of hominins on a vast, unforgiving plain. Survival was a numbers game, a brutal calculus where isolation meant almost certain death. Within this pressure cooker of evolution, a genetic mutation that favored cooperation, that deepened the urge to share food, to care for the injured, to stand watch together, that mutation would have been a priceless gift. It might have been a slight tweak in a receptor for oxytocin, making an individual more attuned to the distress of a tribesmate. It might have been a change that lowered aggression and heightened empathy, allowing for the complex social negotiations of a hunting party. We see the potential results of these ancient genetic shifts in the archaeological record, in the careful burial of the dead, suggesting a concept of loss and connection that transcends the individual, in the shared remains of a large mammoth, evidence of provisioning that extended beyond the immediate self. These were not just cultural innovations, they were likely behaviors emerging from a new biological capacity for deep sociality. Were the first tears shed over a grave, a cultural ritual, or the outward expression of an internal genetic ache for a lost piece of the tribe's whole? This ancient legacy did not vanish. It simply found new expressions in the modern world. The field of behavioral genetics now gently pulls back the curtain on how these deep-seated biological predispositions play out in the quiet dramas of suburban homes and city apartments. Studies of twins, particularly those separated at birth, reveal startling threads of commonality woven through their lives, suggesting a genetic influence on temperament, on the very style with which we attach to others. Some of us seem to be born with a genetic predisposition for stability, for secure bonds. Others may carry variants that make them more vigilant, more anxious in their relationships, or more avoidant of deep connection. These aren't deterministic sentences, but rather probabilistic leans, a genetic nudge. Research has even tentatively linked certain genetic markers to statistical probabilities like divorce rates, not because there is a divorce gene, but because the underlying temperamental building blocks, impulsivity, negativity, a quickness to anger, can be heritable. The way a father's patience wears thin, the way a mother's warmth seems to be an endless well, the simmering tensions between siblings. Could these domestic dynamics be, on some minute level, a conversation between deeply ancient genes and a very modern world? Yet, this biological narrative leads us to a precipice, a profound and unsettling question. If our genes have, over millennia, so meticulously wired us for connection, for bonding, for the safety of the tribe, what happens when that fundamental wiring is severed? What is the internal experience of a child whose primary attachment is broken, whose family shatters, who is left in the chilling silence of abandonment? This is where the story turns in on itself, where the very machinery designed for connection becomes the source of an unparalleled pain. The feeling of being left behind, of being cast out, is not just a psychological wound. It feels like a biological error, a system-wide alarm clanging in an empty house. The same oxytocin pathways that crave bonding scream in their absence. The dopamine systems that seek reward find only a void. This is the dark inverse of the genetic drive for family, the profound cellular devastation of its loss. It is a pain that feels so fundamental, so wrong, because on some level, it truly is. It is a violation of an ancient contract written into our very cells. So we are left not with an answer, but with a deeper, more haunting layer of the inquiry. We began with genes, influencing behavior, and we end at the raw, exposed nerve of human existence. If our biology compels us to connect, then is the searing pain of abandonment the price we pay for that capacity? Is it the shadow cast by our own deepest need?